Due to close and effective work between the force and my office, we are now in a position that we will achieve this more quickly than the planned date of 2021, and that we will achieve this number in May of this year, so a year early, which takes the force back to the 2010 levels. I will talk about some of those levels later on if you give me a chance in some of those questions, which I'm sure you will. The announcement of the government's extra funding to enable the recruitment of more police officers across the country means the force is able to recruit 57 further on the 1310, which will boost police officers again to 1367 by March 21. And whilst Helen will probably use the term the future funding is uncertain, we have a little tease about that. It's unconfirmed. Northamptonshire's total share of the 20,000 should see us funded an extra 190 police officers on current funding formulas. So given what that is, that will mean the force should have over 1,500 police officers by 2023. The small increase I propose this year will also make the cost of extra officers more affordable and make sure increased police numbers are sustainable in the future. But alongside the growth in police officer numbers, last year's tax increase also supported a pledge to improve the response to burglary, with a visit to every single victim of household burglary and the setting up of a burglary team to focus on detecting crimes and targeting offenders. A focus on street-level dealing was also promised, and this has been fulfilled through high-profile operations like Operation Redwood and Operation Lily that have resulted in hundreds of arrests. And I think I talked about it last time. And on the burglary, you know, we're 30+% down year on year for burglary as a consequence of that commitment. During the coming year, I've earmarked 750,000 for which the Chief Constable will invest in increased activity in priority areas of work that affect everyday life in communities across Northamptonshire. In a perfect world, I would like to have come forward today and be able to tell you where we're going to spend that, but given the timeliness of that, I didn't want to rush it. I want to make sure that we come forth with an evidence base, but I expect to be in a position to do that at the next one in March. It is worth remembering that we are one of the fastest growing counties in the country, projected to grow by more than 60,000 people by 2025. So however many more police officers recruit and however much extra tax this brings, demand will continue to outstrip supply. I will be investing in more in commissioning schemes to prevent crime and stop people reoffending, to turn off the tap and bring down demand for policing services. I will be asking the Chief Constable to work with the Chief Fire Officer to ensure that support services and buildings are shared as much as possible so that we can invest even more in the front line with any savings or efficiencies we make. So despite the challenging first financial climate since my first budget, I've sought to make the most of the resources available to me and, where possible, maximise investment in operational policing. I will continue to lobby central government to recognise the inherent unfairness of the current policing funding formula and how it affects Northamptonshire. Madam Chairman, today's report demonstrates the challenges facing policing in an ever-growing county within the confines of an unfair funding formula. Whilst the extra funding from government is welcome, I would like to see the commitment to longer-term settlements which help us plan for the future and provide more certainty in relationship to medium-term financial plans. It is worth bearing in mind in the financial settlement it's referenced in there that despite this increased investment, Northamptonshire will still be receiving less money this coming year than it did in 2010 from central government. The burden has continued to come from the growth in the county and the decisions we've made here in Northamptonshire. So I contest that Northamptonshire residents continue to take a higher burden of local tax related to policing than other parts of the country, which I feel is grossly unfair. So as you can see, we're joined by the Deputy Chief Constable. We'll provide an operational perspective to this year's budget and any questions you might have. He's going to take all the questions, I think, Simon. In addition to that, Helen, I think if we may, we'd like to take you through the report, and we'll probably go through piece by piece and take questions as we go through to make sure we don't miss anything as we go through, and particularly as you've graciously benefited from the additional time we've provided. Madam Chairman, thank you.
Before we move on, if we're going to do questions at the same time, should I perhaps bring James in to tell us the sort of legalities of what we're about today and what our options are? Is that all right?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So clearly scrutiny of the policing precept, and after this item the precept for the Fire and Rescue Authority, represent one of possibly the most important statutory task of the Police, Fire and Crime Panel. It's an intrinsic part of the process of for the Commissioner to set the precepts, and it has to be done in a set way based on the legislation involved. So before the Commissioner is in a position to confirm, to agree his precept, it must be subject to scrutiny by the Police and Crime Panel. The panel must review the budget and the proposed precept and must make a report on it to the Commissioner, and the Commissioner must have regard to that report in reaching its his final decision on the precept, and the panel's report and the Commissioner's response to it must be published. So the panel has the opportunity today to scrutinise the Commissioner's proposed precept and the budget that is part of. Ultimately, the panel needs to reach one of a number of fairly set conclusions on the precept and the budget. So the panel can support the proposed precept without making any further comment or putting any qualification to that. It can support the proposed precept and make some accompanying recommendations, which, as I say, will go in its final report to the Commissioner. Or the panel ultimately has the power, should it choose to use it, of vetoing a proposed precept. So that is one of the most significant powers that the police and crime panels have by law, and reflecting that, any veto must be made on the basis of a decision by a majority of at least 2/3 of panel members. So in the case of the Northamptonshire Police, Fire and Crime Panel, a veto would require the 8 out of the 12 current panel members to support that. So the panel must make its report by a set date, which is the 8th of February, which is why this meeting is on a Tuesday rather than the normal Thursday. If the panel doesn't choose to vote to veto the proposed precept, then, as I say, the Commissioner must have regard to the report made by the panel, give the panel a response to the report, and then those reports must be published. The Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner may then issue his proposed precept as the precept for 2021. If the panel vetoes the proposed precept, there is a further stage in the process, as you would expect. The Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner is then not permitted to issue his original proposed precept as his final precept. The Commissioner must have regard to the report made by the panel in which it sets out its veto, give the panel a response setting out the precept that he now proposes to issue, which referred to as the revised precept, and even more specifically, if the panel has vetoed the original precept because it considers it was too high, then the Commissioner's revised precept must be lower. and if the panel vetoes the original precept because it was too low, the revised precept must be higher. That revised precept must then come back to a further meeting of the panel, which is the reserve meeting that we have in, if needed, for the 18th of February, must be subject to a further review, further scrutiny by the Police, Fire and Crime panel, and may be subject to further recommendations, although there isn't a second veto. Even if the panel submits a recommendation that it doesn't support the revised precept, the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner may still issue that. And so that is an overview of the statutory basis. As I say, Chairman, it's absolutely up there in terms of the specified statutory tasks given to all police, fire and crime panels. It is one of the two elements of the panel's role, the other being the proposed appointment of a chief constable, where the panel has a power of veto that actually prevents the commissioner doing something if the panel takes that decision. Though, as I say, the decision to veto must be made by a specified majority of panel members. Happy to take any questions on the statutory background, Chair, should panel members have them.
I should think everyone's sort of quite well aware of that now. Thank you very much. And so now we'll go on to Helen, were you going to give us more of a sort of in-depth going through the report bit by bit, Richard? Yeah.
Sorry, just on a general point on the opening statement from the Commissioner, talked a lot about the justification for the increase on the increase of personnel, which I'm sure that, as you said, most of the public would want, but that has to be linked with the effectiveness and the efficiency of the force. And you know, it doesn't matter whether we have 5,000 cops, if we're not effective and efficient, or if we're not protecting the public, if we're not doing the boring well, then it doesn't matter what the numbers are. So I would hope that not only do we justify it with regard to the cops that are needed, but also with regard to the improvement that is expected with that increase, that the public gets both visible, accessible and effective and efficient policing.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think if we have short answers like that, it will not mean that I've been lobbied about. Hopefully we won't be here too long. So good. Helen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll take us through a few bullet points out of each section, if that's okay, and stop after each section. Before I do go to the sections, I just wanted to extend my thanks to all our borough and district colleagues and our NCC colleagues. It's a very small, tight-knit group, the finance community in Northamptonshire, and we all rely on each other in terms of timescales and information to make sure that we can all set our precepts on time. So please pass back my thanks to your colleagues and to your teams. They've all really pulled together, and I'm very appreciative for the information. That means that we can actually give firm information today. So if I kick off on the recommendation on the first page, paragraph 2.1a, as the Commissioner has highlighted, he's looking to increase his council tax by £10 to £255.04. That is the maximum that is available to him before a referendum limit can be called. And I just wanted to highlight that to you. In paragraph 2.2b1, it brings in extra income of just over £3 million on the local council tax. Taking us over into the executive summary. Okay. The Commissioner has alluded to it. Paragraph 3.3, one of the biggest uncertainty has been about the future police officer numbers from this National Uplift programme. I won't bore you with how many medium-term plan scenarios that we've worked on, but it's been a lot, every week, lots of them. And each time it's looking at the best information that we have available to us to be able to take those estimates and be able to give them with as much certainty as possible. the National Uplift Programme was 20,000 police officers is a lot of money. So it's a big uncertainty, sorry, Commissioner, on the budget. It is a really big...
We had fun as to how many times we can use the word uncertain.
I'm afraid we'll use it a lot.
Yeah.
So that is the biggest uncertainty. As it was, the latest information on the financial planning guidance we received was literally last Monday, when we were actually able to update our medium-term plan scenarios for a little bit more of a national guideline on those figures. What that does mean is that some of my colleagues around the country who went to an earlier panel are using slightly different medium-term plan scenarios. So I hope over the next few months we will all start to use some more consistent assumptions. Okay. In paragraph 3.6, and we'll come into it in more detail in a moment, the Commissioner has been informed by the consultation of 1,250 residents of the county. And this year it's been undertaken by a company, Social and Market Strategic Research, SMSR, so we can come on to that in a little bit more detail. And I think the only other point that I was going to highlight out of this particular section was also the element that the Commissioner has set aside within his own team's commissioning and delivery priorities, and they're the areas set out in paragraph 3.16 of the areas that where the Commissioner talked about turning off the tap on some of this demand, the areas that he's looking to invest in. So that's supporting domestic abuse commissioning intentions, supporting initiatives to reduce reoffending, supporting crime prevention initiatives, and to continue a further year of the grant-funded initiative, which is called the Early Intervention Youth Grant Initiative, that Nicky's been in conversations with the Home Office and was able to secure a grant. Was it for 14 months, Nicky, or was it 15 months? So
627,000, I think.
Yeah.
It was,
yeah, for that 16 months. So the Commissioner is going to support that for a further year as well as setting aside some smaller levels within his budgets to support burglary and serious and organised crime initiatives with the force when we identify them, and a mental health triage scheme, and another scheme and a new scheme to pilot to support veterans coming into police custody. And the other element of the budget that will go in the budget letters to both the Chief Constable and the Chief Fire Officer is about the duty to work together and the duty to collaborate and look at shared arrangements where possible, be it shared services, shared estate strategies, shared prevention or operational areas. Sounds like a very wide area, but to still highlight that importance to keep driving that important piece of work forward. So they were the elements I was going to highlight from the executive summary. Happy to take any questions on that section.
Thank you very much. Just before we move on to the questions, I think something has to be said about this late information. And I appreciate there was a general election and things were slipped as a result. But I think every year we've been saying this, that the information, not just to the police but to local authorities, gets later and later and makes it very difficult for all finance officers to do their planning. And with the restrictions you say about having just say 1 year's settlement is also very difficult. I just wonder whether your National Association, of Police and Crime Commissioners might sort of perhaps take that up with the government?
Yes, on that front, we're all lobbying for, quite frankly, one of the real challenges here, and also around the kind of, so that the precept limit is, there's no longer term there's no medium term determination. So actually too many times, over the last couple of years, they tell us at this time of year you've got the precept flexibility. You might not have it next year. If you don't maximise it, then you might not be 1.9. It would have been much more prudent for them to have said, look, you've got up to £10 worth of flexibility, and you've got that over the next 5 years. Along with a longer-term financial settlement, would allow me to make much more reasonable assessment of both resource requirements and demand, and appropriately. And also it would be much more helpful to the public to kind of, our working assumption might be, well, it might be it's £6.50 or something. it would be much easier to do. But we are lobbying hard to say, look, we need, if you like, 3 or 4 year rolling funding programmes, because although it's challenging for us, there are a number of kind of national programmes, and I sit and work with some of them, where actually you've got people who don't even know if they've got a job on the 1st of April. So of course we've got these national capabilities that are there to transform policing, and they don't know if the money's going to come in. Now, in fairness, we kind of have a working assumption that our settlement will be no less than than last year, and we do all of the work in conjunction with your councils and financial people to kind of go with the uplift and stuff like that and precept. But of course we don't even know what our precepts is. Is it from 1.9? It's from 0 to 1.99, or you can take it down, but you don't know what any of those things look like until the very last minute. So as you can imagine, it makes for a very intense period. And one of the things I've sought to do in our MTFP, and I think at times has been a source of tension between me and the force, I've said I want you to work on the following assumptions, and actually fortunately in this instance I've been right about the funding being slightly better than we thought it would be, and actually which is why Northamptonshire is in a better place in terms of its recruitment than some of the others, because you've had some forces that will not even advertise until they've had certainty in terms of funding. Well, I think that's putting the public at risk, and so the system really does need reform. So hopefully as part of the CSR we're doing that, and also I'm seeking a meeting with both the Home Secretary and some advisors in number 10 to push both the case for Northamptonshire but also the case for a more longer term financial settlement.
Thank you. And as you say, it's not particular to Northamptonshire. I know firsthand that Leicestershire had planned to have their meeting, the panel meeting, on the 29th of January and had to move it to today because I was due to go and talk to them, and that had to be cancelled. Martin, I think you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. And I think the Commissioner's comments there are very valid, because he made a number of visits to London to obviously secure and get our message across. But I'd also like to congratulate the Commissioner on the level of response that he had to the consultation. It's quite healthy. In Wellingborough, on our budget, we yielded 21 responses out of 78,000 residents. And I was supplied with redacted copies of those consultation responses, and I think I was probably able to put the names to at least half of those. But what it actually does, and the response that you've had, shows that most people in this county realise that policing cannot be done on the cheap.
Okay, are there any other... we'll go through the detailed questions on this and then sort of do the sort of commentary, if you like, afterwards. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask where we are with this disposal of assets, and is that sort of linked into this budget and the potential income or benefits that could come from it?
Our capital programme and our estate strategy does assume an element of asset disposals, yes. Our estate strategy is nearly ready to be shared and published, but we've made sure it's fully linked up to the capital programme, to the Treasury and Management strategy that's nearly finalised, and our overall capital strategy.
And just on that, it is our expectation that we would bring that to give you some insight at the next meeting. It will also be timely, because hopefully some disposals that are currently in the works and some acquisitions that are in the works will be complete or in a position that they're unbinding, and I think I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think you'll find some of them kind of quite exciting.
Andre.
Thank you, Chair. Just pick up on a point from Helen there in terms of the strategy, the property areas, obviously. Clearly, purple services, as the Commissioners always refer to them, is most important with police and fire. But how about going much further in terms of the one public estate and looking at the public-owned assets, not just obviously police and fire, to make that central in your strategy?
I'm going to start and Paul can make some comment. We're completely up for exploring all of those. I would say we were assigned up for the county tried to lead on a kind of one estate. We're absolutely committed to see if we can work with that. But quite frankly, I can't afford to wait for unitaries and all of that work to set out. That's not in the best interest of the public. Working in conjunction with the ambulance service is probably easier, and there's some work that's been going on in a number of places where we can kind of co-locate. But in fairness, we need, in some respects, we can't afford to wait, but we would welcome those kind of opportunities as we go forward. I don't know if you want to add anything, Paul. Have I ruined it?
Mainly ruined it, yeah. Yeah, we're still linked in around one public estate, particularly around Northampton, because that's where a lion's share of that sort of thinking is happening at the moment. There's a monthly board that either I or our head of estates go to around those opportunities in Northampton. And Commissioner's already said around the ambulance service, as we bring forward these, we're not just thinking by service, we're thinking tri-service in a number of locations, and clearly that needs some detail to work through with the ambulance service. But they are actively engaging in a way like I've not experienced them engaging before in that agenda. So I'm more hopeful than I've ever been that we might get some tri-service locations off and running in the county.
Just to progress that point further, have you considered in your strategies, similar to what has happened in Milton Keynes, where they've actually had a blue light hub where there actually should be opening later this year, which includes ambulance, fire and police, all in one location?
Yes. I think is the simple answer. There's when we bring the estate strategy, you'll see there's particular locations where we're looking at where the current buildings for police and fire are less than fit for purpose, and therefore what options can we have to create something new. I'm thinking of one in particular, and that we're having active discussions with ambulance now to make that a very similar concept to the one you're thinking of in Milton Keynes as a way forward for the three.
If you can't tell, we're having to contain ourselves with the enthusiasm with some of the things that are kind of coming down the line. It is interesting. When I came into office, I inherited a £100 million property programme that was unsustainable, didn't deliver for Northamptonshire. We will deliver one for you that's probably about a fifth of that, but delivers way more. Because one of the problems is, and quite rightly, when you've been in a difficult financial situation, the last thing people do is kind of fix buildings. However, we want our people to be the best that they can. So if we stick them in buildings where, you know, in the short time I've been in post, I think we've changed the chief constable's ceiling 3 times as it's collapsed. Thankfully, neither of the two occupants of that office were sat there at the time. Those are some of the kind of bits in our buildings that are like less than optimal, and yet we want people to, you know, fight crime and also keep safe through fire. So actually, I genuinely think, and we did toy with whether we could get it all ready today, but we thought, I think as we agreed last time, we'd do it next time, and you can dig into the detail. And don't get me wrong, there will be some challenges in there, because to make sure it's affordable, there'll be some disposals of some buildings and some consolidations. You know, if you've got some that aren't far from one another, why are we maintaining 2 buildings? So it will mean disposable. But I can assure you, in all of those instances, you know, whether it be Daventry, Brackley or something like that, it'll actually be where we're consolidating in, even if there's a disposal of a particular building, which will open up for some development opportunities for the unitary as well. Madam Chairman, should we go on to the next stage, or are you...
I'll try to be a bit briefer in my little sections, I promise. The background section is just setting the context a little bit for you. There's a wealth of information out there from the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, this excellent Somerset technical team that provide analysis for local authorities as well as policing and fire, and other statistics out there from the HMIC FRS. What it does show is that Northamptonshire's population is increasing, and it's increasing at a faster rate than many other areas and higher than the national average, and it is continuing to increase and projected to increase further.
Can I just add some context to that? Because I think one of the bits that's worth kind of highlighting here is if you took in, and I'll ruin your own bit, that next down here, the number, the population over the last 10 years has grown from something like 600, as you can see on the graph, 680,000 to the best part of 750,000. As you'll see in terms of the working assumptions, the assumption is that the tax base will continue to grow by 1.75. Doesn't sound like a lot, does it? Until you times that by 5 years, and that shows you that the population is going to grow by another 9%, just under 9%. So we keep growing at this rate, then our police officer per head of population, and I take Richard's point around kind of efficiency, but today I'm particularly talking about the number we've got, because actually I can't remember the exact numbers, but broadly we're growing at a percent, something like 30% faster than the rest of the country. You know, and those are significant numbers. So it's very easy to kind of go, yes, our police officers and numbers will be back to the same number as 2010, but our population's grown by 10%. And actually it's great that we'll have over 1,500 by 2023. Well, our population will have probably grown by another 30,000 then. So, you know, in the 20-year life, we'll have gone from something like 680 to the best part of 820,000 people. With all of that comes with it, and obviously that comes as impact for fire risk as well. And I think it's that inherent, because of that growth, and it's a great place to live, that just the funding formulas don't catch up. You get the benefit of local council tax, but this isn't just a challenge for us. This will be a challenge for all unitaries, for all of the health, and actually I think that's where, on behalf of Northamptonshire, and I myself have arranged a meeting and a briefing in Parliament for all of our MPs to make sure that they understand the wider implications of this population growth. It's great on one level, but they're going, oh, we've got a little bit more money in terms of your council tax. Yes, but your demand is actually going to outstrip, whether that be children's, whether it be social care, and all those sorts of things. And I genuinely think that's unfair on behalf of Northamptonshire. I should get off that soapbox for a minute and pass back to my colleague.
Thank you. So yes, lots about the tax base growth. We have made a prudent estimate of 1.75% in the MTFP. This year it came out as 1.78%. It was close. In previous years it's been much more, but we keep looking at, it's been over the 2 for the past 3 years, I think. So we will keep our eyes on that, but we wish to be prudent at this point in time. Paragraph 4.7, I've got my copy is in blue and orange. I'm just conscious that colleagues might have, oh, you have, or you might have it in 2 shades of grey.
I've sent them out, look.
Sorry, so...
Sorry, through you, Chairman. Members should have had a separate colour page included with there.
Thank you.
Well done, James.
Thank you. So the bottom half of the graph actually shows the amounts that come from central government. As the Commissioner highlighted earlier, it is less in 2020-21 than the cash amount that we received in 2010-11.
And correct me if I'm not wrong, that's real cash, that's not inflated through and all those sort of things. No. That's real cold hard cash. Cold hard. £4 million less than we had in 2010. But you'll notice the big jump from 43 to 63 million that's come from local taxpayers. And like I said, a larger proportion of that is through the growth in the county, but also it's some of the tax increases that we've levied over previous years.
Yeah. So they were just the sections I was going to cover on that.
Let me just let Helen finish this a little bit first so that we might answer your question.
Helen, you know, when you've done that statistic, bar statistic, what was the comparison benchmark with your nearest neighbour when you look at this population increase that you have indicated clearly on a previous page, page 4, over a period of 30 years. Is this trend similar than Northampton, or Northampton is the exception to the rule as far as the increase in population?
I haven't looked at individual areas, but I can tell you that the national average, whilst it's increasing, is much less than Northamptonshire's increase. So Northamptonshire is above the national increase. There are small pockets in the country that I think are feeling a little bit of growth, obviously like Northamptonshire, but nationally we are above the national average.
I could probably answer that in a slightly different way. And I'll make this as simple as I can. If you take the police officers' FTE per 100,000 of population, the national average is 183. Our most similar group is 169, and we are 159. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, does it, when you kind of think, well, that's 10 less. Well, if you times the 100,000 by 7.5, it is, 70 or 80, that's just our most similar group. If I took to the national average, it's like 150 less police officers. I'm sure I'll ask Simon what he could do with 150 extra police officers in a minute. But they don't sound like a lot, but when you kind of roll them up, and I deliberately did 100,000 because actually the numbers I've got is 1.83 per 1,000, doesn't quite have the same ring when you kind of put it up there in terms of the numbers. If I really wanted to get carried away, since I have got the thing, is if I talked about at the same time, because I'm sure Richard's going to ask me this question, so I thought I'd just get it out in advance, is what does that look like in crime per head of population? So Northamptonshire in the 1819 was the third highest force for reported homicides per 1,000 of population in the country. Now, those are still relatively small numbers, but it was the fourth highest recorded. So during the same period, and of course some of that relates to then some of the stuff around county lines, our proximity to London, and that between there and Birmingham. And also, actually I was going to say, our proximity to London comes with a number of challenges that are kind of unique to us, Northamptonshire, in that, of course, the Met, we're all on a recruitment drive. The Met has just launched an entry-level police officer can start on £30,000 a year and gets free travel. We were offering, before this investment, £19,000. Now, we've actually taken ours up, correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, it's like 24,400 or something, I think, off the top of my head. So actually, we're much more kind of comparable. I mean, I even did an interesting one. I was over at the Hindu temple where they were doing the 71st Indian Republic Day, and the cheeky blighters, I'm going to say politely, from West Midlands were over recruiting in our area. So they're actually trying to tap into our ethnically diverse population and steal our best people that it kind of come down. I did have some good fun at their expense in terms of thing, but it kind of just shows you that, of course, we're going to recruit these extra 20,000, and you know what that probably means. That's more like double, upwards of 50,000 to achieve that, as I myself have discovered when we tried to get 83 extra police officers, we had to recruit 200 more. Just give some of the context around that.
Sorry, Robert wanted to come in.
So a question on 4.7, where it says there the public of Northamptonshire contributed 34% of funding, and that's forecast to rise up to 43%. Have you any insight into how that split compares to our peers?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, and would you share that?
Okay. I'm happy to share that with the panel. I don't have all of them on my fingertips here, but definitely the local people of Northamptonshire pay a bigger share than a lot of places around the country. Stephen can probably give examples of exact places.
I think, well, you set me up for failure there. I think the thing I would say is that the local taxpayer's bill is in the top quartile. and in terms of revenue from central government, we're broad. With the current settlement, we may be in the bottom third. We previously were in the bottom quartile. So actually, in terms of in the end, per average, we actually are broadly in the middle because the two cancel one another out in terms of funding. I think it's actually something like 45% rather than 50% of that per. But we've got it on some graphs. We can get it for you, and happy to circulate it. And we'll get that one to you before the next meeting.
Just a matter of explanation with regards to when do government look at the situation that with regards to the amount of funding that we're actually raising from the population, do they take that into account when they actually give us their particular funding? Do they say, you know, Northamptonshire has got all this amount that's coming from their population, so we can reduce our funding from central government?
No.
Right.
Sorry.
Basically, we are, as a simple rule of thumb, whenever you hear a national number, Northamptonshire is 0.95% of the total. Now, that's where I think it's grossly unfair, because, of course, our population, there was a, and this there's some smarter people around than me. I think something like 2000 and was it 2015? A lot of work was done on someone's on. I think I don't know if it's me. There was an alternative funding formula put forward, but there were some inherent issues that were found in it, and so as a consequence, it was kind of cancelled quite at the last minute. I think, Paul, wasn't it? There is going to be a new funding formula. But I think with what you see going on in some of our urban areas, then no government wants to be seen, because that's what it means. It means you've got to take some money away from someone to give it to us. Now, I would contest that actually, because they're not dealing with some of those things, we're dealing with those problems. The Force did some great work in the back half of last year. You know, we've talked about county lines. In around, and I'm using this broadly, in September we had 31 county lines in Northamptonshire. As a consequence of the Force's great work, they took out 21 of them in the towards the back end of the year. So when I talk about Redwood and Op Lily and the hundreds that were actually arrested, now of course this is an ever evolving picture, but that kind of gives you some idea to some of the challenges and some of the success that's also being had.
Richard, you want?
Yeah, I probably know the answer to this one, but I just wondered your views on it. It goes back to, remember that first question about how many cops do you need to keep Northamptonshire safe? You know, with regard to what does the government think the right ratio is? My concern about policing going forward into the next few decades, if we don't really understand how many police officers we need to keep our community safe, then basically we're asking for an open check on as many as possible. So the question must be, it can't be about just averages, it's got to be about needs analysis. So with regard to Northamptonshire, has there been any more work done with regard to, do you know what, we need about, I don't know, 1,300 police officers, and that will keep us safe with some sort of formula, or is it still sort of finger in the air job?
I'm not sure I quite like your analogy, finger in the air, Richard. But in answer to your question, yes, an awful lot of work's been done, and I think that he's lining up the mic. So since Simon's done an awful lot of work, I probably can't help but comment, but I'm going to let you go to that question, because an awful lot of work has been done. But I think the bit I would say, they still take kind of predictions, and I think that's one of my challenges to the Force is, yes, this says this is what it's going to look like in terms of growing, but that's why it's ever more important that we take money and we invest it from stopping in conjunction, not only from ourselves, but actually in conjunction with our partners. And actually, I think you've heard me say, I welcome the change around the kind of unitaries. I'm not just saying it because you're hopefully you'll be in charge of community safety in the West, Richard, and we can work better. Well, I'll make my plug for it if you wish. I wish too that we could kind of work together, because actually some of these problems are only going to get solved in conjunction with people, and we need to kind of make investment in stopping that happening. And I probably flag here, I'm trying to extract collect extra money from government. And let me be clear, not every single penny will go to extra police officers. Some of it needs to go in very much investment in prevention. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I guess the start point is what problem you're trying to solve. And so to work out any number of staff, you've got to work out what your risk is in any business going forward. And some of the challenge with that is it's how far ahead you can predict. So I joined in 1992. It was heroin, crack cocaine, robbery, vehicle crime, burglary. I never thought I'd be talking around the dark web, Bitcoin and international fraud. So what does that look like? Should it be local? Should it be regional? Should it be national? So to some degree, there will never be a perfect, you need this much and you'll keep safe, because safe from what? And I think that's why we've got to predict it. So what we've been doing over the last year is, first of all, how do we understand the risk, threat and harm? And the key bit, I think, going forward is the police, local authorities and other partners, particularly health, working really closely together, because we'll do JSNAs and everything else. Where's that overall threat assessment? So population growth may be good, may be bad, but it depends on the type of population growth of risk to me. So more young people, given the risk that we have around child sexual exploitation, etc., could be more of a risk for me than a different type of population growth. So the work we do now is, and it's really boring, but that's the job of the deputy, I suppose, is very much around strategic assessment. So every year now we will assess the risk, threat and harm and what that means for us, what's changed, what's different. We go through now every part of the business, and it's on a rotational basis to look at, do we understand what they're trying to achieve? How many staff have they got? Is it the right staff? Is it the right combination? One of the challenges with the National Uplift is it's given us officers, which is really positive, and you will want to see visibility as I will. But are they the best individuals now to investigate online sexual exploitation? And what type of skills do we need? So it's not just about the numbers, it's the type of resource that I need and the type of join up. And again, what we need to do regionally, because there's some things that will definitely cut across the Northamptonshire border. So to really simplify it, strategic planning, we understand now are starting to look at risk, threat and harm over the next 3 to 5 years. That's still not long enough, but it's where we've got to on a maturing basis. We then go through each of our functions, and we've got a constant demand running tool to say, based on what we know, this is how many staff we think to do response. But again, there can never be a pure science, because I can go to one incident and somebody's got significant mental health problems. It's going to take an awful lot longer to deal with that. If they're a child, it's going to take longer because I need an appropriate adult. So we're using the best estimate we can of this is how many we need. So I'll give you an example at the moment. Based on current demand, I need 360 officers in response to be able to turn up, deal with it and investigate the crime. And the big shift that we've made is I want them to own that crime. It's been a bit like a Amazon conveyor belt of handover after handover, and you will all know quality diminishes on every handover if you've not got that quality. So part of the change we've been doing over the last year is to get back to basics and understand it. We're doing it in an incremental basis, because big bang doesn't work for me, and you'll try and fall over an organisation that, but quite frank, Nick and I and Stephen's drive to us is it needs to be better. So we're doing it incrementally. We've finished off almost now the response, the custody. So again, I've increased the amount of custody inspectors because getting the right criminal justice outcome is right. We've then done the control room. So how many people do I need to deal with calls? But it's now online reporting as well. So we look as many channels as we can. We now can let people upload their dashcam footage and we'll deal with that as well. So we're trying to think in different ways and different ways come in. The next bit we're moving on to is crime, vulnerability and intelligence. And again, where does that link regionally? So we're doing the same process, understanding demand, understanding what we've had over the last few years, what type of demand we've got in. But again, half of it, or some of it, what worries me, if I'm honest, is the hidden demand. So if somebody gets punched in the face, they report it in, and there we go. I've been assaulted. What happens if somebody's been trafficked? What happens if we've got modern slavery? What happens if I've got child exploitation? I need to go and look for that. County Lines doesn't jump out and report it. We've got young people who are being kidnapped and tackled in this county that we need to get the intelligence for, and where the firearms come in or the knives. And unfortunately, knives can come from anywhere. And probably the kitchen is the biggest armoury of weapons that anybody would see. So we're starting to do that. We're estimating at the moment in terms of, we then move on to neighbourhood policing, and again, looking at what place-based policing looks like. So in one sense, we're now understanding, using best practice, using demand, using our force management statement that looks at the risks over the next 4 or 5 years, and building it incrementally, exactly what we need to get. Now, I can't give you that number now because we're still in the middle of it, but the next bit then is, well, where do you want to prioritise? So the next part, taking Stephen's police and crime plan, looking at what's come out of their own surveys that we do, what the public tell us is important to them, but also we do what's called a risk, threat and harm assessment that says, look, on a national basis, on a national framework, we look at what's the biggest risk. So biggest risks right now, knife crime is significant, serious and organised crime, burglary we've put in there because we know how important it is to the public, killed and seriously injured on our roads. So that helps us to prioritise which areas we'd invest more in. So everything can't be a priority, so I have to invest different amounts in different areas. As for the force itself, of where we're taking that, the start have been, to be frank, stabilising the force, and you will know the HMIC criticism of that front end being able to deal with investigations. So we spent the last year stabilising it. We don't have significant queues waiting for people to be allocated an investigator now. We've invested in training for our staff, and as Stephen said, and if Nick was here, we've got to invest long-term in our workforce, both in capability and capacity. We've got to invest in technology because it changes overnight, but we can be more productive and by doing things, and we're already investing in mobile devices. But we've also got to get into an evidence base that understands things, because most people who come before me for a promotion board have never failed at anything in their career. But it can't be true, can it? And we've got to really, and so Nick, and if he was here, we'll be talking about a closer working with the university to develop a real evidence base of what we do has got to have some sounding behind it for long-term work. And then the big shift that we made, and Stephen and Nick will have updated you, is to reconnect with our communities and certainly move into the local policing areas. We both felt that that needed to change, and then we need to invest further into what does local look like. But again, that would be a conversation with yourselves, particularly at those involved in local authorities of, policing will not solve all of the problems. So what does building strengths in all of our communities look like? What does the early intervention around mental health, drug treatment services, education, getting into our schools look like? And so very much we would see our place-based offer of not just policing, but what does a joined-up local approach look like? So long-winded answer, but I thought I'd try and cover off a few things. But we are now building a real strong evidence base of why I need 360 in response, why may I need 20 inspectors or sergeants sat within there, and we're doing that incrementally for every part of the business. What you then say to me is, but Simon, that's going to change over the next year. So again, the strategic planning cycle will mean we'll review it again, and it won't be as fundamental, because when you have to do it on a major basis, you hopefully get a platform to build on, and then you build incrementally from there.
You know, that's impressive, and I think that's one of the things that I think we as politicians, once we understand what your demands are, is that we can actually then help fight and work with the residents to say that this is justifiable increase, whether it be a precept or whether it be how many cops and PCSs you have in the community, and that is really, really encouraging, and I wish you the best of luck, and one day I would like to know how many cops do we need and PCSOs and everything, and I'm sure we'll get close to that the more work you do. Thank you, Chair.
I've got Anita waiting patiently.
I've got a question for you, Simon. I think you've been very, very clear about your forecast and your training. My question to you is, on the basis of page 3.12 specifically, you are going to have 1,367 by March 2021. Would you say that your workforce currently at the moment has the capability in terms of the skill that the police officer have for tackling the crime like cybercrime? And if they have not that academic qualification, because I'm sure that you inherited of existing employees, and among that lot, what's the percentage who really can tackle those crimes that you've identified? Because the type of crime that is at the moment has changed tremendously from what it was even 10 years ago. and unless your employee, i.e. your new recruited staff, have an academic qualification that include IT skill, then this Northampton is going to be all the time on the back. So that's what I'm interested on your response. Thank you.
I think there's a broader point over, have our staff per se got the capability to do the job that we want? And one of the things that we've gone back to basics of is, what is the training needs analysis and what's the skills matrix that I've got in the force? So what skills do I currently have? And then to understand the next 5 years, which is we have the snappily titled FP25 plan, what type of skills do I need to get in the basics? So even at a basic level, we've put all of our sergeants, and now every officer is going back through basic investigation skills, because that's the foundation. Whether it's cybercrime or whatever else, you've still got to investigate it and put it before a court. We're doing that across the whole organisation now to understand what skills we need, but specifically talking around cybercrime, sometimes it's easy to lump it together. So when I think of cyber, it's as much around having assets and who can do undercover online, so to not trap because that would be wrong, but to target individuals who are trying to lure young children into sexual activity. So that's on one aspect. The second part is international fraud. So what does that look like? The next aspect is we have what's called the Police Online Investigation Team, who will, linking into national teams such as the National Crime Agency, will make sure that we draw off images that have been uploaded onto the internet. But of course, the training that I need just doesn't end with the technical, because every sex offender that we catch, I've then get a sex offender order. So we also have to look at increasing the amount of case managers we've got in our sex offender management unit, because the more I catch, the more get prosecuted, the more get a sex offender order to manage it. So where I look at the moment as well is, what technical skills do I need here and what do we need at the centre? So there's the National Cyber Centre, because if you look at denial of service attacks that could wipe out the whole of the system, and we saw the NHS had ransomware attacks, we need to be able to rely on, at that time we need to press a button. Can I afford it here? I can't. So we're looking at what's at a regional level, and we have the East Midlands Regional Organised Crime Unit, and then what's at a national level as well. So part of it, and Stephen, as you might say, has a responsibility to make sure that the strategic policing requirement is dealt with on a national level, is to make sure that we join all that up together. What I would say is we have got a growing capability around online fraud. It needs to increase, and certainly I would expect the review, because I see the amount of scams that affect a lot of our communities coming out, but prevention is also another aspect. So to tackle it, prevention element, that can be my neighbourhood teams of just make sure you've put something onto the internet, and it's people like my mum's age, my age, who probably aren't as confident, and online shopping can be one of the biggest fraud issues if you've not got the right kit on it. So, but the more specialist stuff, that's where we do need to invest. But again, I'm not sure whether I need an investigative mindset, we're still developing, or do I need somebody completely technical, or both? And it is a bit about, and then the last area around cyber is our criminals are getting more and more conscious of protecting, so we've got to invest in this. So when I think of cyber, the training needs analysis, we're now starting to understand it, linking in with the region and national levels, and then making sure that we recruit the right people. The challenge is that the funding I have at the moment means it's more likely got to be officers, when actually there's occasions when it could be a real key systems analyst that I need, as opposed to a police officer. But we're working through that as we understand it.
Can I just add something to that? I think it is worth, you know, if you like, the step up over kind of recent years in investment. I mean, the first budget that I put forward to that I inherited was something like Northamptonshire Police with £110 million. The forces budget this year, subject to you approving the precept, will be £136 million. Take Simon's point, and we're trying to do some work to make sure the balance is right. It's not all about kind of police officers, but also because of the kind of step up in recruitment, probably 40% plus of our police officers have been with us less than 3 years. There's probably not a number dissimilar across the whole of in terms of the organisation, because in some respects, you know, we rob Peter to pay Paul. You know, there's some real pressure in the control room because we keep stealing them, or actually our number of specials has deteriorated quite a lot because we've kind of taken them on. I mean, the good thing is that means in terms of our time to recruit and in terms of capability has been better than in other places. But it does come with kind of real challenges. And Simon talked about there, and not everything is always best done locally. There's some stuff that is better done locally. You know, like for instance, we used to share our HR resources with another force. We brought back to Northamptonshire, and it's given a much greater grip. Because actually I had the embarrassing thing when I started, and for quite a long after I started, the force couldn't tell me how many police officers it got. And you'd kind of think it would know that. Yeah, I mean, that, you know, it's embarrassing when I kind of look back and I think some of the things that I want to see do. I can assure you, when I see from when I started to where we are, we've made significant progress. We're not where we need to be yet, and this additional investment helps to make some of those things kind of come true. But isn't it that you couldn't know how many police officers you got? But there are other things where it's better done regionally. You know, I went to see one of our regional team, and they were showing me something on the dark web. You will probably never visit. I hope none of you have actually visited the Silk Road 2, but it's available on the dark web, and I could buy myself a Kalashnikov rifle, a bit of Colombian Pure, and I don't mean coffee. I could have someone targeted for a hit if I needed them. But the bit that fascinated me the most, as someone who knows a little bit about online, some of them offered money-back guarantees. They asked for you to review their services. You know, so actually, you know, you kind of look at some of the sophisticated, you know, where someone talks about the sophistication of some of these kind of criminals, that, you know, you can, you know, some of you might be having your Amazon package delivered with your, you know, your new Echo. Well, other people are having their, let me have my Colombian Pure delivered to my kind of house. So some of those are better done. You know, recently, I also sit on the board for the National Enabling Programme. We've recently launched the National Monitoring Centre for Policing, which actually to enable us to kind of monitor our systems. It sounds really obvious, but actually one of the key things is if we don't put those pieces of infrastructure in place, then also we can't share data. So actually one of the real strengths is when we work together in conjunction with people, is how are we going to better share our data with partners to keep the public safe. You know, some of the data that I'm trying to write the used term, but actually people who come with an incision or basically where they've been stabbed at A&E is the best indication of what's going on, not what we collect in terms of knife crime. So actually understanding those, then you can kind of better target when stuff is getting better. So it's also trying to take a more holistic view in terms of the information that we've got, rather than, I know it wasn't that long ago that you were a police officer, a very good one, Richard, that actually that some of the metrics that kind of policing used, that we need to kind of look wider to bring some of those sorts of things together, and you need people with kind of different skills.
If we could just
Councillor Birch would like to
get a little bit close. I think Councillor Birch hasn't spoken yet, so we'll go to her first.
Thank you for the really impressive overview of, you know, police and the police work and the challenges. We're talking about the precept here, and whereas everybody, I think, you know, faced with the knowledge of those challenges would say, no problem, raise the precept. What my residents will say to me is, oh, the precept's going up. I cannot get in touch with the police. I cannot report on 101. You know, the simplest basic thing, you've got incredibly sophisticated systems in place, but that for the people out in the general public, that's their interface with the police, and I'm afraid I get an awful lot of complaints about it, as I'm sure you do. So is that in your plan for...
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just reviewing the control room at the moment, and what we're trying to do is offer ringback. So it's not just all the time is that I want to get straight through. So there's got to be different ways. So some people want to report online. Majority of people still want to phone us. So the control room part is critical. We need also to educate people, because sometimes we find the calls aren't necessary for us. So how can we get them dealt with elsewhere? we're looking at 3 key priorities as well, or outcomes that Nick set us as a force. So one is protect people, one is confidence, and that's, am I going to get through? Could be a matter of confidence, but also satisfaction. The first bit is ease of access. So we're now starting to measure the performance of that, because there's no good me just reviewing it if it doesn't get better for the public. So we start to get now the survey results. Some of that has got quantitative data, some of it has got qualitative data. Generally, ease of access is one of the higher areas. We also review abandoned call rate, so people who come in through 101, they go into our triage system. We offer a callback if they want to contact us later or we want to get back in touch with them, so it's not just waiting on the queue. There will always be times when the absolute demand strips out something. So if there's a major accident, everybody phones in on the 999 system. But we are starting to see some of our answering times improve, our attendance times improving. So if there are specific areas where it's regularly a case, then I'm more than happy to look at those. But we are now putting that into the performance framework. There's no point reviewing it if people can't get through. But it is important that we encourage people that there are certain things that aren't necessarily for us, and it does wind the system down. And certainly what I want to move to as well is dip sampling the quality of service call we get. So I could answer every call if I pick it up and go, thanks ever so much, etc. But it's about getting that right service length. One of the things that we have noticed, that again, it comes back to where do you put your resources. But the more we have to assess vulnerability, and quite rightly at the front end, the longer that call is going to take. Because certainly when I joined, it would have been get the details off the pad and then you would have allocated an officer. Now it's what's the risk assessment, do we need to get there, what's the long term, is the children there, what passes on to other agencies, and to capture that crime right at the front end. So we're now starting to understand what the call wrap-up time is, because if each call takes longer to deal with because we've got to ask more questions to establish risk at the front end, then it's going to delay and reduce the amount of people I've got. So we are monitoring demand. We are making sure we're looking at satisfaction in there, and we're just finishing off the review. So I would expect to see that our satisfaction figures, which is the ultimate test of whether people are getting through, is improving or not. But if there's specific examples where it's happening on a regular basis, I'm more than happy to look at it.
I think I'd just add to that is one of the things that we've seen is the time taking to pick up calls is going down. And that's as a multi-faceted approach. So, for instance, just over the last year, we've gone from less than 1% of our crimes being reported online to nearly 13. So that's an astronomical piece. Now, of course, that is a real benefit because actually it means, you know, the force's staff actually have more time to deal with all of those. Sadly, at the same time that generally the number of calls that they get continues to go up, and there is still some work to do around particularly kind of 101. And one of my, I throw it out there as some of you will be running for the new unitary, is there a way of making sure we connect our kind of call systems, because actually somebody's got a problem, then, you know, Northamptonshire Police is one of the few, along with the Fire and Rescue Service, 24/7 businesses, if you like, that people ring. And actually, you know, calls do go up from, I'd like to say 5 o'clock on a Friday, but it's more like about 3:30 on a Friday afternoon through until it. So there are, in terms of other services that we pick up, but actually we could do a better job of connecting them and making sure that we route people through. And, you know, someone asked about public estate. You know, is there an opportunity to actually co-locate some of those people to make sure we can give a better service to the public? But a bit I want to assure you, there's some clear performance framework. The response times are going down in terms of what it takes to answer them, and like I say, some of that is as a consequence of better on the forces side, but also it's better from an online reporting as well. But also the problem I sometimes have is I do go to public meetings, so kind of, when did you have that problem? And I go, well, about 3 years ago. So sometimes there is a bit about, and to be fair, that would be much more valid. I'm much more comfortable around 101 and 999. To be honest, I can honestly say much more comfortable than I've ever been, if I'm honest. That probably was starting from a relatively low bar, though.
I think that if we could just go on Helen's, and we'll come back to a couple more of the questions, because we need to make sure we cover all of the sort of detailed things. If we can just carry on with that for the moment.
Thank you, Chair. I promised to speed up a little. I do apologise. The next section, is to show the previous precept strategies, but to try and reflect this year's precept strategy and the budget proposals in the context of the whole PCC term. So you can see how they link, how they flow through, where the strategies link through. In terms of, I can go straight on to the public consultation unless you wish. Okay, I will whiz through it. We've talked about the good response on the public consultation. I'm delighted to tell you the consultation is on the website now, should any of you feel the urge to have a little look. It's been a new approach for us this year to have the telephone connection with the public. We feel it's worked quite well. We think it's worked very well. And it's also given us the opportunity to build up some extra qualitative comments, which is essential in informing the Commissioner.
And that was kind of quite important because, you know, one of the things in terms of confidence in it, we wanted to be assured that, you know, that I haven't got a lot of well-meaning individuals filling it in more than once, if you know what I mean. So by us ringing him, we actually kind of had more control, done by kind of an independent firm. It increases kind of that confidence both to me and also to the public that we've done it properly.
In terms of the precept considerations in the grant settlement, I just wanted to highlight to the panel how many times, if you like, within the Minister's letter they highlight the expectation that the PCC will actually increase his precepts to the maximum. I think it was more times in this letter than I've seen in any of the past few years. So it was really just to highlight that for you. But also... And
I do think that was an interesting, in my deliberations, that was an interesting challenge that was kind of put in front of us. And one had to kind of weigh up not charging it, because I take very seriously the responsibility on me that we're asking the public to pay more council tax. It hard-pressed people to pay their hard-earned cash over and give it to me as the current custodian so I can hand it on to the force to deliver. And I don't do that lightly. But it was interesting in the government, if you look at the 9.4 million, 3.5 million comes from local taxpayers and 6 million comes from the government. And the 6 million is very welcome and is by far the biggest step. I don't want to say the only, but by far the biggest step. I think that one is bigger than all of the things and some times by 5 or something since I've had in the whole time I've kind of been there. So it is the most welcome, and I don't want to appear in any way, shape or form ungrateful, because I'm hoping there'll be a few more years of it, if you know what I mean. But with the same work that said, well, actually, I could foresee a scenario that if I didn't make this decision, the number of police officers might need to come down in future years if I didn't make this decision now, and actually at the same time that the population kind of continued to grow. And that was a really difficult one. But on the basis of 20 pence a week, I felt it was the right thing to do for the long term, for the people of Northamptonshire first in their safety, and then Northamptonshire Police's long-term viability afterwards.
Thank you. Over the page, I don't intend to go into the comprehensive spending review of 2015 and 2019. They're just there to give the panel context.
If you can't sleep, it's worth a read.
Thank you. Roll-on review 2020, that's the one I'm looking for. But I will just highlight a couple of points in the police funding formula. Councillor Pritchard, you asked if the government took account of different circumstances, or I can't use your exact words, each year when they were allocating the funding, and I said no. That's because we've had the same formula in place since 2014-15, and so what happens is every force gets the same increase or decrease as each other each year. But it's important to note that way back in 2014-15, when that formula was put into place, a damping mechanism was put into place, so it wasn't actually fully rolled out in that year, and we were victims of that damping mechanism. So not only did we not really like the formula, it was when it was put in, it was also damped. So
gave us a crap funding formula and then they damped it further.
Yeah, so to the tune of over 2 million, I think it's about 2.4 million that we are damped on our grant every year. So I just wanted to give you that little bit of context, Stephen's talked about the value for money profiles. So in terms of the grant settlement, I don't intend to go through all of it. I've picked out some of the highlights within the report for you, which is really focusing on the 20,000 police officers that the expectations are there for us to do and to work towards. Over the page in paragraphs 11.6 and 11.7 are some of the key elements that this Somerset technical team have pulled out for all police and crime commissioners. And I draw your attention to the change in what's affectionately known as reallocation, or sometimes called top slices, of the police grant formula. And you can actually see the difference that there is now in 2021. The value has gone up and there's a wider range of them. I don't profess to understand what all of those different teams do or don't. So if there are any questions, it might be a joint effort.
Since you said that, what's a top-up for NCA and ROCU?
It's National Crime Agency and Regional Organised Crime Unit, so it's tackling serious organised crime.
Excellent. Thank you.
Helen, I think you were still in mid-flow there, weren't you?
I don't mind whatever works for you, Chair.
Okay. Well, I'm rather interested in two particular areas. One is the pensions grant funding, which is, I find worrying. We're increasing the number of officers as we want to, and we had to supplement in 2019-20 by the 300k, and now it's obviously going to be worse. And the second area is the capital grant, which has suddenly plummeted, and in paragraph 11.10 from 424 down to 113. Did we have any explanation of why that was?
On the pensions grant, I agree totally, and it's something that affects our fire colleagues as well as our pension colleagues. Remember this time last year we were talking about that huge actuarial variation, and at one point we thought we might have to bear an even bigger burden. It does irk me. I think it's a lot of money, and with the extra officers it will keep on growing. But at least it's still in there. There was a worry that at one stage for both fire and policing it might go. So I don't want to sound too ungrateful, but at least something's still in there. On the capital grant allocations, no, we didn't really have an indication. There is something in the paper, if I can find it, where I actually quote an element from the Minister's letter, where it actually talks about PCCs having a bit of greater flexibility, bigger budgets and a bit of greater flexibility in their settlement this year. So that really was the only explanation we have. It has been top sliced and gone on to national capital projects, and it does impact on our local capital programme and how we fund it locally with our revenue. So I think I've highlighted in the report, it means unless we have more disposals, it's more internal borrowing or more expensive external borrowing. With the PWL rates going up, we'd rather there's not too much of the external borrowing.
Yeah, probably.
So I've two questions. First one relates to going back to 6.6 on the consultation, where the 71%'s been mentioned. So the paragraph says more than two-thirds of residents, 71%, were willing to pay an increase for policing, with 43% prepared to pay £10 or more. So given that the proposal is to increase by £10, does that indicate that perhaps the people of Northampton will not be supportive of this increase?
As I said, I suppose the easiest, and I don't mean this glibly, I'll find out on May the 7th, when I put myself up before the people of Northamptonshire, whether they will decide whether it was a good or bad decision. And I think I've said this previously, I didn't take this job to look back and say we didn't make the people of Northamptonshire safer. So I very much feel that it is the right thing to do. I think the 71% gives us some support in my choice, but ultimately I'm afraid the wrath of the public will be rained down upon me, but I shall find out in May. But it's on my judgment and my recommendation to you that it's the right decision to make.
And possibly the elected councillors at this meeting as well. The second point was, well,
all I was going to add to that is we at the time that we set the questions with the agency who did it for us, we weren't sure on what the rules were going to be from government. So the question was asked was around a £4 rise or a £10 rise. So there's a big gap in the middle there in terms of numbers as well. But equally, there were people who would be prepared to pay more than £10. I forget the numbers. I think we put a £24 or something in as well. So we were shooting a little in the dark because of the lateness of the government saying actually the referendum cap is a tenner as to what information we were able to give. For example, in previous years, we've been able to say, and if you go over this rate, there would be and the need for a referendum. And obviously that also helps inform the public as to whether they'd be prepared to pay that or not. But we weren't able to do that this year.
Last year, the percentage was much lower, wasn't it?
It was.
Thank you. And the other point, just spelled on page 10, 11.6, 7.5% increase in core funding. That's funding from central government, is it? Slight concern in this is in previous years we've justified increase in the police precept by higher than people's wages are increased because of austerity and central government turning off the taps. Now central government are turning on the taps. We're still increasing it by higher than, I don't think many people will be getting wage increases higher than the police precepts increasing. So there is a concern there that there's always going to be a justification for increasing the precept by more than people's wages. That does concern me.
Let me put it this way. I hope you and I are here next year to have that discussion around what it might or might not be. I genuinely believe that the level of flexibility I've given in recent years and the step up puts Northamptonshire Police on a much more sustainable basis. As I've previously probably alluded to both today and on previous occasions, Northamptonshire Police needs to get its fair. Northamptonshire needs to get its fair share from central government. But when you sit in my seat, if you like, which sometimes can be a warm and fuzzy place, but doesn't seem to be very often, that actually when you kind of balance the risk, then that's the conclusion I've come down to. And today you'll tell me whether you agree with me or not. But I think the bit I would say to you is I'm very acutely aware, and it's hard to kind of play out in public how much angst we had over it. The exact percentage, you're right, is just, I think it's 4.03 or 4.04. So you're right, it's absolutely, it's 1.5% above inflation. The challenge we've got is, of course, there's some devil in the detail, as you can see, in terms of they've given with one hand and taken some stuff back with another. And the uncertainty over what future years would look like meant, let's put it this way, if I knew I had £10 worth of flexibility for the next 5 years, would I have gone for £10 this year? Honestly, probably not. And that's one of the things we're seeking to do. Either remove the referendum limit or give commissioners a cap. But at the moment, this whole 1.99, if they don't increase the by inflation, the core grant, and because on one hand, they don't do that, and in previous years, they then increase police pay at a rate that's, it's simplistic terms. So let's say increase police pay that's well deserved by 2%, they keep the funding formula flat. Well, guess what? I've got to raise it by 4% just to keep the same amount of resources locally. So I kind of hear you, and I suppose in some respects, it's the first time that I've seen a big increase from central government in my time in office. The problem I've got is I don't know what next year and or the years future look like, but what I know is we have an MTFP right now that means that it's sustainable. I don't think Simon will ever be completely content about the kind of money going forward, but actually I am, that this puts us on a sensible basis and means that the numbers of officers we've got we've promised that we can actually deliver. But please, I want, in a perfect world, I'll get 20 million pounds extra a year from the central government. I don't think that's going to happen, by the way. Then I would be more than happy to actually, I can take it back down. So it's not, it shouldn't always be up. You're right, it's a careful balance that needs to be taken.
I look forward to that day when we're decreasing the precept.
With regards to page 9, 11.3, you talk about, the additional allocation, and also the very last sentence says Treasury has asked the Home Office to find £120 million as savings from within their budget. Does it mean to say, as I've commented down here, they give it to you with one hand and take it back with the other?
Yes, it does. They would have increased the grant by a little bit more if they hadn't taken off the 120 million efficiency savings.
Right, and the very last one actually is on page 10. It talks about the Police Transformation Fund.
Could you just tell us what number, because we don't have the page numbers.
Number 10, and it is 11.7. 11.7. And it talks about the Police Transformation Fund. First of all, what actually does that mean? And secondly, why isn't there any allocation in 2021?
The Police Transformation Fund was something that was, I think, was how many years? About 4 or 5 years in operation, and it was designed to enable transformation. You created a centralised fund that basically they bid to. I probably think it's right that they actually did take it away and actually give the money out, because in some respects what actually happened was they gave them to programmes, and I don't think some of them were truly transformational, others were not. But you'll notice that some of them that they've put up here, I think, where was it? There was something where they put some back in, I can't remember which one. Some of these national capacity programmes and some of that, they put some of the things in there. They've essentially devolved it locally and said it's up to you to drive your own transformation. But I do, I'll get off the soapbox in a minute. I do think there's some opportunities for greater coordination across forces. You've seen I'm not sure all Chief Constables agreed, but the Chair of National Police Chiefs was kind of saying, well, actually, should there be a situation of less forces in this country? I'll probably go on record that I don't think there should be, but I do think we would benefit from what I would call a digital backbone to make sure there was consistencies in processes and information that's kind of shared across. And that was what the Police Transformation Fund was supposed to do, and I think Simon's going to make a comment as well.
Yeah, Chair, there's just one issue on that. So it was put in, as Stephen says, to leverage innovation. So one force does it, then you roll it out to the 43. But some of that, you'll see, was in for serious and organised crime. So one of the challenges I know Stephen and Nick have engaged in is some of that is actually propping up some of the regional capability. So around £4 million. So if that comes out, there's then choices of, if we lose capability we're brought to tackle serious and organised crime based upon that grant, we've got to work through it. So certainly I know Stephen has pushed back of where you need to find efficiencies at the region, but it is things that some of it we wouldn't be able to get rid of completely, and it's some things that we'd have to continue. So they're phasing it out, which is fortunate, because we were facing a situation earlier this year where we would have had to shut down key things at sudden notice, as opposed to having a considered view, and Stephen's asked for a review on it.
Yeah, and I think on that, on a national basis, Craig Mackey is doing a look at, in terms of capability, will start hairs running, but it wouldn't surprise me, the NCA has kind of been looking to sort of strengthen itself and turn itself into more of a kind of an FBI. I would see, you'll see a direction of travel on that hoovers up some of those kind of national capability. But the key for that is, as long as we still all plug into the same infrastructure, that's good. It would be really bad for them to have their own systems and then not all connect together. But also it's worth contrasting that there is almost a £48 million increase, £50 million increase in strengthening and organised crime, and the creation of the top-ups to the NCA and the ROCUs to mitigate some of those things.
Can I just ask, we've come out of one of the collaborations, haven't we, during the year? Has that made an impact on the budget?
I don't think we've actually exited a collaboration. We have, what's the word? Deprioritised. That doesn't mean we've completely exited. And I would, if the one you're referring to is MOPS, I would say it's been a stunning success on its return to Northamptonshire. So you have a greater roads capability, and also we now have, you know, and I remember when I started that people said we don't bother calling for dogs because, quite frankly, they never turn up. Since we've already sold them, I have a quick plug for it, is some of you have seen our wonderful dogs. These are available now at £5 at the discounted price, because we're in the new year. This shows some of our dogs that we've actually got, and these have gone to fund some new ones. And actually you'll see these two here, Spyro and Baxter, our two newest drugs dogs that are coming on stream. Yes, they're very cute. I did think about bringing a drugs dog to show you, but I thought it might make some people uncomfortable. I felt most of you were safe that they wouldn't get any excitement in this room, but I don't know what else has gone on in it, so I thought best not. But I think so. Actually, now we're expanding our dog capability. Something I would want us to see us do. And some, you know, I went on a raid last week, and Charlie, he's getting a bit old now actually, because I think we bought him from West Midlands, and he's going to retire soon. But we need to make sure we kind of continue to develop that capability. So is MOPS, was the deprioritisation of MOPS, because we left something in there in terms of about centralised training and consistency, yes, but it's worked for us. But there are other ones, quite rightly, that we should probably invest more in. You know, Simon spoke to me and the other PCCs work in collaboration with one another along with the chiefs around some of our regional capability. There are some of those areas that we may put more money into, because actually that will make the people of Northamptonshire safe. You know, I've talked a little bit about kind of homicide. Major crime and murder is done on a regionalised basis, and thank God it is, because actually in the past, if you'd had that situation, it kind of bring us force to standstill. So if you like, think of them as like an amazing task force that comes in, you have that incident, they're kind of that insurance policy you hope you never need, but actually, you know, across the region it kind of gives you some additional resilience. So we look at all of those things as part of these budgets.
Richard, I think you had...
Yes, it's the annoying thing about debating is that you get a point that Rob raised and you think, I got something to add, and of course but I just want to take back to Rob, and it's actually quite a really good point, and it builds on the comments I made right at the beginning about the justification of the public giving more money to the police. It's something that Jane said about, you know, the 101 experience, that when the public have an investigation, you know, it's a devil's own job to get hold of the officer in the case for an update, and sometimes updates aren't even provided. Now, if you are right, ultimately the public will decide in May whether you continue as Commissioner, but I think the operational side has a big responsibility to you, that as you put your career on the line with regard to asking for more money, that the services begin to improve. And it's not on the major. The major we do very well, or the police have done very well. You know, the murders, the counter-terrorism, and all the other things do very well. It's on the things that affect residents day in, day out. Now, if you're going to expect money from them, then the operational side then have to step up with regard to effectiveness and efficiency, with regard to making sure 101 is a good experience. Now, I did have a recent experience of 101, and quite frankly, it was excellent. I was through into control room really, really quickly, great assessment, and very efficient. But that's not everyone's experience. So I think it's right that proof will be in the pudding as we ask for more money from the public, that we see Northamptonshire coming to where it should be, you know, one of the premier forces in the country.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, back in a minute, Simon, but we're nearing 2 hours now, so I think perhaps if we can sort of start to round up. But Simon, do help.
I absolutely echo what's just been said. We are at the moment inadequate. Our ambition is to be outstanding. I don't think that's unachievable, but it's going to take a while. Good is the next journey on the line, and it's got to be consistency. It can't be that one person gets a good service, one person doesn't. The performance framework we're putting in place stops looking at, trying to understand what's happened and what we're going to do differently, because numbers don't change unless you do something differently. Stephen gives us full support, but quite rightly is having that accountability. So from measuring call time to answer, call time to dispatch, what the quality service looks like, that's absolutely what we're focused on. But last year has been around trying to stabilise, because if we don't do that, there's no point trying to get there in the first place. My expectation and Nick's this year is improve positive outcomes, improve productivity and a better service to the public. So that's what we're focusing on.
And just to, Richard, you make an excellent point. And I can assure you there's some very robust conversations kind of go on to that effect. And part of the reason I brought both chiefs here is actually they should feel how much pain I have to go through to get them the money when they things, so they can understand that it's not, taking the point was made here, that it's not a given that I'm always going to raise the precept at the maximum. They've got to deliver on behalf of the public. I'm slightly feel constrained by this one given the times, because I'd like to, a bit like we did last year, we were very clear about what the public would get in terms of benefit, and I write an annual letter to each of the respective chiefs to say, look, here are what my expectations on behalf of the public. And just to revert to last year, one of those was particularly around burglary, and actually the force has worked admirably to deliver, almost a third reduction, 2,000 less burglaries year on year. So actually it shows that the system in terms of accountability and it was work. But also, it's there, and to make sure that I hold them to account for the delivery of that performance. But I just want to reassure you, we are making progress, and I'm interested in terms of those bits around kind of timing. I know, and some of you know the complaints legislation kind of changed over the weekend, came into effect on the 1st. So also we'll have greater visibility on anything that's concerning the public. But one thing I want to reassure you around, the number of calls I get around 101 complaints have dipped quite significantly. So I know that we're starting to make progress. So I have kind of absolute performance metrics that I can see things improving, and I also can see it and hear it from the public. And I know Northamptonshire is making progress. The key bit though, and you and I have had this conversation, is that it needs to be consistent and it needs to be sustainable. I've got great pockets of excellence. I've got some stuff that's just mediocre, and it needs to be, it needs to be sustainable in the longer term.
So James has very helpfully outlined some of the things we need to be taking into account. Whether the panel considers that the proposal to increase the precept by £10 is a reasonable approach. Is it confident in the robustness of the assumptions that have informed it? What risks might arise that could affect the ability to deliver it as planned? Does it consider that the proposed precept and budget links in with the police and crime plan? Those are the sort of things that we're taking into account, as well as things like the public consultation and the implications of the capital grant allocation. So has anyone got any more comments that they'd like to on a strategic level want to bring in? Martin.
Thank you, Chairman, and waited a little while to get to this point. I support the increase as it's detailed here. It equates to less than the cost of a takeaway meal. Please bear a bit of thought for the authorities who have to collect the money, yet only get about 10 pence in every pound that we collect on behalf of lots of different people. But I support this because I believe we're on the right journey. We are making clear progress in the right direction. I'll give you two examples of that, if I may, Madam Chairman. And can I firstly say a big thank you to the Commissioner who visited Wellingborough last Friday, where he met our housing team, heard all about the excellent work we're doing to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping in our borough, met our local enforcement community protection team and visited our multi-storey car park, an area that's been targeted by antisocial behaviour, drug dealing arson, as Darren knows, and more serious, some very bad assaults. The Commissioner heard our plans to spend £5 million to improve the car park, with lots of initiatives to design out crime. And I'm confident that tomorrow evening we'll agree to that spend, and work will start literally in a matter of days. Secondly, a rather serious assault took place yesterday on a member of staff enforcing environmental crime. I got in touch with Superintendent Dennis Murray, and he came back to me within 3 hours with the outcome of the initial investigation, and that took place 5 minutes before this meeting. So what I'm saying is that we're making some real improvements in working closely with everybody that's involved in tackling these crimes. I welcome the new initiatives to tackle drug crime and Operation Lily in Northamptonshire, which is starting to have some real progress. I welcome Northamptonshire Police's use of Taser. I think it's an example, it's much needed. And the Commissioner knows my views on property and the promise that he has made, and I'm sure will reach fruition, that any rationalisation of property that results in savings, those savings will go to frontline police and fire services. And I think that is really, really important. The government has recognised Northamptonshire, and in particular Wellingborough, for its central location by actually having the first ever state-of-the-art prison without bars, a rehabilitation prison which will be opened in 2021. And at the heart and culture of that prison will be rehabilitation, as I said. May I suggest, Madam Chairman, this is probably the right opportunity to put in a suggestion that that this committee might wish to ask the Ministry to come and do a presentation on that, or alternatively, at a suitable time, probably later in the summer, have a visit to what is an absolutely stunning development that is taking place. And of course, if the country has decided that Wellingborough is a good central place, can the Commissioner please consider that Wellingborough is a very central place for any rationalisation or property initiatives that he wishes to
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Going to page 21, section 18.6, the best, mid and worst cases. Of course, we're agreeing or not agreeing the increase for this year, but then that flows through into further years. And despite that, Helen, if I'm right, does this factor in acceptance of this current increase?
It does.
Yeah. So even based on that, in a mid-case basis, we're still looking at running into significant shortfalls. So my concern in this is that the police and precept becomes the solve in all these. It becomes the balancing figure. Yeah. And would it be possible, if it's not currently available, for the Commissioner to come back with a contingency plan that would enable us to deliver against the FTFP, and by all means call out any negative implications that may have on performance?
Can I suggest we do an update at the time of the spending review? Because I mean, yes, we're happy to bring back further information as appropriate, but a lot of this is based on what will the spending review 2020 later this summer bring. I'd be very happy in one of the financial reports to bring an update on the MTFP with the latest information from the spending review in there that will definitely change all of these figures on all of the scenarios.
And whatever those figures look like, that will include how we're going to balance the books, is that right?
That will definitely include addressing that question. It might not give the full answer, but it will definitely have a clearer picture for us to know what we're balancing to.
And I think to push it back a little bit, I've seen how much these numbers have fluctuated so quite dramatically. And whilst they look terrible, it is worth bearing in mind you're talking about £1 million on £146 million worth of expenditure. the deviation just on this year's budget, and you've kind of given me a nice opportunity to talk about some of the things for this year. So the deviation, even in 2023 on the midpoint of 1.3, is probably similar to the underspend that we'll achieve in this financial year in terms of some of the efficiencies. So, you know, having 1% deviation on it is in terms of expenditure is one thing. The other one is a lot depends, and there's a number of assumptions been made about how much they will fund next year, how much there's kind of wild speculation. The bit I want to assure you, through to 2023, we've sufficient reserves to make sure that we have got all of those kind of covered. So in some respects, I want to make sure that they focus on delivering the correct outcomes for the public, rather than kind of remodelling something that's probably going to change quite significantly after the comprehensive spending review. So the comprehensive spending review, I think we're expecting a budget in March and updates as we kind of go through the year. So as we go through the year, I think what I'll do is we'll kind of give you more information as we go through. But you know, if I look at it over the next 2 years, I think we'll be, and this is my, Helen probably won't agree with me, and that's the yin and the yang that you need. I think we'll be somewhere between the mid and the best. I don't think we'll be anywhere near where it is in terms of the worst. Now, you know, that'll be my problem to solve if we kind of get that wrong. But what that would look like in simplistic terms, how we would manage that is we will turn the tap off of recruitment. That's what it would mean. That's how we would balance it. That would be what we would do. Now, that's the last thing I want to see happen right now, because some of the decisions we've had have got us into the good position where we are. What's not clear, that you can't quite see from all of these numbers, of the 700 million that the government allocated, I think is it 540 million or 160 million? 540 million we get as part of our core grant. 160 is based on performance. So I'm also, because some have not made the right decision early, there could even be a scenario that they don't get their money. Personally, I'd like to get my hands on their money if they don't recruit in time. So there is some. It's quite a challenging position to be in, and I think this is probably the first time we've had such a difficult outlook as to what the future kind of doesn't look. So I think for me, we put the risk is down at a very manageable basis, which is also why the decision for the £10 was important. As much for future years as it is for this year. And I don't know if Simon kind of wants to think, because you know, he and I have had some very robust conversations about what was sustainable in terms of police officer numbers. But the key bit is, if we need to balance it, do you know what? We can very easily. We just turn off a tap in terms of number of police officers coming through. Now, I'm not, until I've got a clear outlook of what that looks like, I've no desire to it. But also don't underestimate, and there's the reason the language is in there around purple, sharing of buildings, transformation directors, is I want to look for efficiencies in our enabling services. And what that also does is, by bringing in transformation directors, it also frees up some of Paul Simon's time to make sure that, you know, you look at the totality of the 136 million, 22 million or 25 million is spent on enabling services. A big chunk is that 113 million of operational capability. You know, the forces overtime budget is £3 million. There's very small things that can change, that can blow these out of kilter. So I suppose the long and short of it, and I'm not trying to be rude, I like to be all straight with you, is at the moment I'm content with where we are for the next 2 years, that quite frankly, as we get more information as we go through the year, but I'm comfortable in terms of where we are. But there'll be a lot of pressure on to say, keep trying to find efficiencies. I don't want the force to be, and I think you can assure me, no one's walking around with the feeling that, oh, we've got lots of cash, thank you very much. We've still got to make sure we do it. I don't know if you want to comment any more on that, Simon. Just
to build on that before go further, then the assumption built into the MTFP of increases in the precept of 1.99% per annum does not look unreasonable. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And to be honest, I don't, you know, I am elected. You know, you don't want to kind of create commitments that you find yourself getting hung on, if you know what I mean. If I found myself in a difficult position that the government, for whatever reason, instead of giving the £30,000 per police officer, if you like, which is what it, I think was it 32 it needs to be or something. So anything that they give of short of that means that kind of the erosion, in some respects, it doesn't. It is helpful to me to have a scenario that doesn't show that all is rosy in the garden when I'm negotiating with central government to try and make sure that we get a fairer share of money. Because I think what's going to happen is I don't think they're going to adjust the funding formula in the near term. However, what I'm looking for, I think I'm hopefully have got Northamptonshire in, along with a couple of other areas, that they will look to provide extra money to mitigate some of those pieces for us. So in some respects, no, I'm not going to ask the force to cut, because actually, in reality, they could balance it tomorrow. But that's balanced some numbers, but it hasn't made the community safe, it's made it less safe. And that's the difficult that we've kind of got in front. Is there anything you want to add? So I think, actually, Helen wants to say something else.
Probably important to say, when we were looking at the budget and we were looking at the MTFP and the levels of reserves, we were looking to ensure that we had at least 3 years that if there were shortfalls that we could fund those from usable reserves if we needed to. It's the same basis that the external auditors use when they're looking at their value for money assessment. If you needed to balance your budget over 3 years, could you? So through all of our planning on the budget and on the MTFP, that was right in our minds. So on all of those scenarios, yes, we can balance them for 3 years if we had to, which means that should the spending review be worse, should we have to find levels of savings, that we can do so in a sensible, planned way, and we don't have to do the knee-jerk turn off, turn on, turn off today or tomorrow. So I hope that gives a bit more context.
I think also bear in mind that we have lobbied hard to get a fairer funding. I had reply back from all of the MPs that I wrote to, and their replies were forwarded from ministers and senior people in the government, and they all referred to the fairer funding review as that is the thing to look forward to. So I'm just hoping that they will look favourably on us, because of the per head, the funding for Northamptonshire is out of kilter with similar forces, and I think it will take some courage to do that, but I'm just hoping that the extra pressure we put on them will give an extra bit of funding per head of policing. Sorry, Simon, you wanted to come.
No, I think it's a really valid point over making sure that we don't just keep asking for money going forward. I think the first point for me is looking at what the risks are. So there are unfunded significant national projects such as the new airwave system that's there. We don't know yet from Treasury. I'm not talking to policing as to who picks up the liability, which is significant. That's just one example. So some of my concerns over long-term ICT projects. And again, we don't always know. As Stephen says, we get about 28,000 for new officers. That doesn't cover their cost of allowance. Now, so understanding cost pressure is the first bit. The second bit is efficiency sat within there. Stephen's absolutely right. As I get more staff, that overtime budget will come down significantly. There will always be occasions with a homicide or a major attack that you end up with having to deploy quickly. That's policing, but there are ways, and I can see already, where we don't deploy efficiently. In terms of other services, the thing that I constantly talk to Stephen about is we are coming from a very low baseline on performance that's not good enough. We've got a model going forward. I can't afford that to knee-jerk all over the place. I need to build some sustainability, which is what Stephen's working with us on. Going through all of our enabling services, I go through what's statutory. So all you need to do is tell me what's statutory, what's mid and what's high. None of them are high at the moment. Most of them are on the mid-level. Statutory would just mean that the things we talked around training plans, they'll be out the window because I've just trained core. So we haven't got contingencies. The only thing I would be reluctant to bring in more specific terms is, as this is a public meeting, it would talk about staff. It's not buildings, this would be staff to make further cuts. And I'm not comfortable that would be in an open forum, so it would have to be something more subject to Stephen's agreement, confidential.
And I think I just want to say that I actually genuinely don't think it will. I think for me it'll be it's kind of going to be in that kind of mid to high, and I'm afraid in the end It's what the people of Northamptonshire elect me to make that judgment, or kick me out if I get it wrong. I'd like to say on the last couple of ones I've probably been right. I don't mean that in a kind of a glib way, because boy am I glad I'm right compared to some of the ones that thingy. But we kind of worked hard to get to that point, you know. And sometimes it doesn't get seen, you know. One of me and my colleagues, we got the you know, candidate Boris Johnson in a room in Thames Valley, and we kind of had a thing, and we managed to extract the kind of 20,000. Now we're just trying to make sure that we extract the full amount of money for the 20,000, and then actually, you know, it kind of makes good sense. But I want to reassure you, by making this decision, we are making Northamptonshire safer.
Ian, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very happy to support this increase in the precept. A huge amount of work going on in the background. It's good to hear from Simon all the work that he's doing. There's a lot of positives in the budget, and if you look at it where we are today compared to 4 years ago, the improvements, we're not there yet, as you've said. You know, there's a lot of improvements to do, but we're on a journey. And I think the journey, as well as the fact of Simon saying going from where we are today to be good, to become outstanding, is a real challenge, but I know you will take it on full on board. So yes, I'm very supportive of this, and I could feel justified to talk to my residents and say, yes, I agree with it, and the reasons why, after today's meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I think the other bit I would say, and I'm not just saying it because Simon's here, and I actually, and I haven't always felt this way, and I think I've talked about it before, I feel more confident in Northamptonshire Police's future than I have any time in my time as Commissioner. I feel that we've got a strong leadership team. I kind of like the fact that you don't always agree, because actually there's some robust kind of conversation that they're all kind of having. The force is kind of better led, and one of the things that we recently did is our staff survey. So I look at indications of things that's moving in the right direction. And one of those was actually the confidence in the force in itself. Do the people that are being led, do they feel there's been big jumps in kind of the force's confidence in itself? And so that now then needs to translate into performance for the public. There are some early signs of that, but there's still some way to go, and you and I will be holding them to account on that basis.
Nietzsche.
Yes. On page 21, 1812, now I know that you said that as far as the general reserve, there is a 3% of the total funding for both 18, 19 and 2021. Would that additional investment opportunity that you've indicated in this paragraph require additional funding and future demand and risk which may transpire? Do you know at this point in time, have you got any idea of what those type of investment are? And would, looking in a crystal ball, I suppose, but having a list of potential investment, would this then be covered from the general reserve amounts?
In terms of the general reserve, I really don't like to touch them. I'm trying to get them to a nice round figure. I'm working on that with the Commissioner.
Her magic number is 5 million.
5 million would be
nice. I think she's about £140,000 away from that. I feel that the underspend in the OPCC should help her deliver that. And then we're going to leave it alone, aren't we, Ellen?
Yes, then it will be a nice, sensible balance for a few years. We've crept up to that amount from 3 million 2 years ago, so we've been making good progress. So I don't like to touch the general reserve, Mr. Shields, but we do have quite a lot of other reserves at the Commissioner's disposal. So there are elements in there in terms of an invest to save reserve. There is the Safer Roads Reserve that I know that the Commissioner's used under certain conditions to help in that development in Northamptonshire. There's also something called the Additionality Reserve, and we're going to think about renaming this at the end of the year. That's a reserve that we had created this year out of the budget if we needed to use reserves to smooth the impact of the additional officers, for example. So there's also the PFCC Initiatives Reserve in there. So I just wanted to give you an explanation that there are a range of reserves for us to use at the PFCC's disposal for initiatives, and he has done that through the year, and I expect that he would continue to do that.
And I think just to reassure you on that one,
Yeah.
we will be taking in the forthcoming year a kind of a more detailed look at some of those, given the kind of funding envelope that we've got, to make sure, you know, that we mitigate some of the risks that we've got in terms of particularly around some of the technological ones that we're kind of laying down. Because if you like, the two big other than people, our two biggest areas of investment are buildings and technology. Buildings, if you like, we want a good, firm environment, and I think we've got a really good thing that we'll bring to you next time that isn't that's costed, that's efficient, that will deliver on behalf of the people of Northamptonshire, but both enable police and fire to work better together. In addition to that, though, the big area, and this comes for both police and fire, there is some real work to be done around our kind of technological innovation and kind of versatility in that, to make sure, because, you know, taking Richard's point, that's never far from mine, doesn't matter how many resources we've got, how well deployed are they and how well used are they. And actually we're starting to see some of the benefits of that, just even at a simplistic level, pulling all of our information together, understanding how much time our PCSOs and police officers are in police stations that are actually on patrol. So actually those sorts of insights enable us to drill down in terms of teams, to make sure that you both know where they are and where they're actually there. So it's not just about visibility, could be increased by making sure we spend less time doing paperwork and actually are kind of out on the streets. So there's other things that people will get benefits from.
My question was on the paragraph 1812. I wanted to have the reassurance, because you have specifically said that to ensure that there are sufficient reserves available to offset the shortfall. So what I'm looking for is that you have made some disposition in your program of investment that this funding would be there to cover for those investments, the risk, etc.
Yes, we have, yes. At the end of March, the Commissioner will have almost £16 million of reserves at his disposal. We're obviously ring-fencing the general reserves, and yes, we have made estimates on both investment and if he needs to draw down on those reserves to balance the medium-term plan over the next few years for that as well.
So, I think we're probably about complete with the questions, etc. So I'd like to draw this to a close. I don't know whether members would feel we need sort of proposer and seconder to move to that. I mean, that would make it fairly formal. Yeah.
So if you propose when he's in the room, because then
I'm hoping.
I know, I'm hoping.
But we sorry, Martin has appeared just in time because we were didn't want to be sort of down on numbers. So I was just saying, Martin, whether we want to sort of actually have a proposer and seconder and move to a vote. I think it's a sort of fairly formal thing rather than just a nod.
This is to support the proposed
This would be to support the proposed precept and budget. We have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour? Okay. Any against? None. That is... That was 100%. There can't be. No,
I just want to thank the panel for their support,
okay.
and the rigour with which you've asked me questions today.
Okay, I think James is going to come in now.
Yes, through you, Chair, just as a procedural point. Could I also ask that the panel agrees to delegate authority to the panel chair, yourself and the Deputy Chair, Councillor Auger, to approve its report on the proposed precept to be submitted to the Commissioner by the 8th of February. So the report will reflect the conclusion and obviously some of the supporting discussion that's got to that point. But it would be impractical to convene another meeting of the panel to sign off a report, so this is the approach we take as standard.
Is everyone okay with that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, and Dan has sat very patiently there while we're dealing with the police, and we now move on to the proposed fire and rescue precept. Are you going to?
Madam Chairman, this is my second budget for the Fire and Rescue Service, and despite the many pressures and challenges that exist in the service, we've been able to prepare a balanced budget for 2021. When the responsibility of the service was transferred to me in January 2019, it had the lowest level of national core funding. Despite this, we've made significant improvements in operational performance, including now responding to incidents more quickly. And I want to take this opportunity to commend both Darren, his team and the firefighters for the great work that they've done, despite difficult circumstances, to drive forward that performance. It has made great progress in the last 12 months after some challenging years when it suffered because of the financial difficulties of the County Council. The service is stable and already improving how it keeps the public safe. This year, I'm proposing a 1.99% increase in the Fire and Rescue Service precept, which equates to just £1.21 a year for a Band D household. However, in our consultation, 81% of public said they would pay even more to fund Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue. Madam Chairman, had there been flexibility, and this might not make it popular, but I'm putting it out there, to the level of council tax precept, I would have done so by £5. I would have been able to put the finances on a much more stable footing and allow the Chief Fire Officer to make major changes much more quickly. This is something I will continue to raise with the Government as we continue to balance the fire and rescue budget and build up our reserves to an acceptable level. Whilst I'm very grateful for the support of the public and their willingness to pay more for the fire and rescue service, the Chief Fire Officer and his team will press on with their plans to invest and renew and continue to improve the service given to the people of Northamptonshire. Over the past year, the Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue Service has been able to launch the largest recruitment drive for over 10 years for 32 new firefighters, of whom 12 are filling brand new roles to increase the size of the fire service in Northamptonshire. 7 new vehicles have been purchased to replace ageing appliances, some of which are more than 15 years old. I want to put on record again my thanks to the Chief Fire Officer and his staff who worked really hard and made significant strides forwards making Northamptonshire safer. For example, more fire appliances are now available to respond to incidents, and they respond more quickly. Response times are now around the 10 minutes instead of the 11 minutes, and between 18 to 20 vehicles are available to respond in the county, particularly in the evenings when people are at home, sleeping and cooking. Work is underway to also share support services where possible with Northamptonshire Police to increase efficiency and give the fire service more capacity in this area. Buildings occupied by both organisations are being reviewed and shared where possible so that the estate is cost effective, affordable and an enjoyable place to work. This will allow the maximum amount of money to be put back into frontline services. Madam Chairman, we are under no illusions of the financial challenges that still exist within the Fire and Rescue Service, but today's report helps to underline the progress that has been made in a relatively short time. As you can see, we're joined by Darren, and I commend my precept to the panel.
So can I just get absolute clarity on this? The £5 is now not allowed. Okay, so, yeah, okay. Just to...
Well, we're kind of in a weird situation. So there is still the remote possibility, because of the timing, that they may come forward with it. So James is much more up to me on the procedural. You may choose to vote on a conditional basis that says I give you latitude for one and or not for t'other. But At the moment, I think all we can do is ask for approval on the 1.99, but you might give, maybe, I don't know how that works, if there's I'm afraid it's a timing of local government settlements over policing settlements, I think, is the challenge there.
Yeah. We're awaiting the responses from the local government final settlement. The consultation on that one finished in 17th of January, I think. Unlike policing, they have to go with 2 settlements by law, whereas policing can go with 1. We don't know the date of when the final settlement will be released, so the PFCC has to come today with his proposal, and he wanted to be clear that if there were the opportunity there, he would have really liked to have asked for that. But the deadline is closing.
I think also we need to recognise the fact that the starting point was no reserves, no capital put aside, and also because it's not just fire, and it's a lot of the work is obviously road traffic accidents, is the number of motorways and the roads that we have in this county, and the risks and the amount of possible incidents that you have to attend. So it obviously links in with the road strategy that we were talking about before. I was very taken with the charts that you gave on various pages of where we are in terms of the Band D and where other counties are and how much they get in funding, and the fact that we're almost the lowest, I think, is very telling. And some of the others charge a huge amount of council tax because of their low rates. So Shropshire, for instance, is one of the highest of council tax, and it always strikes me that well, I've always found it's an anomaly, the fact that when you have something like 1.99, it's 1.99 of a very low base. If it was £5, I think it would be fairer, because it's an exact amount, because it just reinforces the fact that you stay low if you're only going a small percentage. And I think it's very unfair, particularly since we are, so low in the first place. I'm sure you have views on that, Stephen.
What I'm going to do, and yeah, we talk about the challenges. I mean, I just this week, you stuff keeps coming out. It's very easy if someone kind of say a reserve is a bad thing from a financial point of view. We want to spend obviously every penny that we can that's raised from the public to spend on stuff. But like just this week, I had to authorise just over £100,000 to remove asbestos from both the Mounts and Kettering Police Station, Fire Station. They had been there for a number of years. They were known to the County Council, but they had not been acted on. So actually, we are still cleaning up some of those bits. If I may, Madam Chairman, I think I'm going to get Helen to go kind of briefly, and then Darren in the interest of time. So if you want, should we just run through and then take questions? And I'll see if I can do something about the banging over there.
Well, it sounds like a leak, but we can't find it. So
I'll highlight a few key areas, Madam Chairman. Things are very tight on the fire budget, and many thanks to Darren and his team, who I think unfortunately we scheduled them in for Friday afternoons, where we actually poured over that budget detail line by line together. A number of Friday afternoons. It was quite tough, and we were really struggling with all of the budgets. It is so tight, which is why we were pleased when the provisional settlement came out and looks slightly better than we were expecting. We were really, really pleased with that, and we don't take it for granted in any way. The thing that we are uncertain about at this point in time is the National Pensions Grant. Fire get that as well. We don't know what that means. We know the total figure will remain the same, but unlike in policing, where I believe the same allocations are being given to police forces, for fire, the cake is the same size. How they cut it might be different. So I don't know what that means for Northamptonshire at this point in time. So the little bit of extra that we have got through the settlement, for the moment, we've ring-fenced that until such time as we have all of the local business rates information and we have notification on the National Pensions Grant, and then hopefully there will be some extra to work through, some extra priorities with Darren. He's been doing an awful lot of work on those priorities. There is a very big list. There is a very big list of capital and revenue and operational and equipment requirements. So you'll see through the report there's quite a lot of reference about we are reviewing the capital programme again at this point in time. The estimates in the MTFP assume the previous capital programme. We expect that we can use some of the Section 106 receipts and some of the unapplied capital grants to actually get some of those costs down in future years. And so we're also working with Darren about timing of things like appliances, the estate strategy, and building in a sensible operational equipment replacement so Darren's not faced with an awful bill every few years, a huge bill. So we're trying to smooth that as best we can. But as the Commissioner picked up, we have this year picked up some unexpected costs. Some were expected, some were known. We have found that the premises costs are a lot more than we envisaged at the time of the governance transfer. And we have to bear in mind that the governance transfer took an awful lot of time to be approved. So as time moves on, information you're relying on gets older and older and older. So we have picked that up. We've made provision in the budget for higher premises costs, which is why a joint estate strategy is really important for us to move forward and to move forward with momentum. Darren and his team have been identifying savings where we can, and we have been able to build a few of those in. We've also built in some interest income, so we're making Darren and Stephen's money work for them, and they get to keep the investment income that's generated from that. But it is a tight budget. The reserves aren't enough. We need to, and we have got our plan to build those reserves to a sensible and appropriate level, but it is tight, and I think that is the overview for the report.
Thank you. Darren, did you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you. Afternoon, everybody. I think the first thing probably to say is we are a unique fire service. We are completely different from everybody else. And because we're the only county council service that transferred our governance to a commissioner. The other three that transferred were combined fire authorities. And that brought with it not only the legacy issues that we brought from the county council, but all the issues around no reserves and stuff like that. So when you look at every other fire service on the chart that you mentioned, Madam Chairman, is that all of those will have MTFPs that already take into account things like their capital programmes. Our MTFP doesn't take into account our capital programme as such, or the fully costed one. And we know as we start to build that in, there are going to be, there are shortfalls. It didn't. But there's going to be shortfalls. So once we've built that in, they start to be shortfalls in that. Every other service is not in that position. So we are very, very unique in the sector. The other thing is, I think just on a national level, is that our funding still comes out of MHCLG, yet our policy comes out of the Home Office because we transferred back to the Home Office a number of years ago. And that's something that absolutely has got to get sorted out one way or another, because our funding settlement is linked to the local government funding settlement, which is why there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And also the fact that fire had no protection at all through the whole austerity period, as local government didn't effectively. So we've taken sort of double and triple whammies effectively through all of that. So, we're in a position post-governance change of having to sort of build an organisation really from sort of the ground up, and all of those things that organisations rely on, all those back office functions, at the minute are quite fragmented. We're having to do all of that stuff and build capacity in order to be able to stabilise the organisation, while at the same time trying to make some incremental improvements, while at the same time trying to do transformation on things like enabling services and estates, while at the same time trying to build a capital programme and trying to build reserves all at the same time. And to be honest with you, the staff who had already been through quite a difficult number of years in the county council have pulled a lot of rabbits out of a lot of hats this year in order to sort of move the performance on in the way that it has. 2% or 1.99%, is welcome, but it isn't enough. It isn't anywhere near enough, to be honest with you. And my fear is, we're going to run out of rabbits or we're going to run out of hats, effectively, because you can't keep on, doing that. It's very, very difficult for me to keep on looking my staff in the eye and telling them, I can't provide you with the resources that you really need to do the job that you really want to do, because we've got some really dedicated and motivated staff, both on stations and at headquarters. And what they really want is the ability to be able to do that. Now, I think the difference we've had in the last year is that, the organisation knows that the Commissioner's doing everything he can to try to bring funding into the service, both in terms of raising precepts, but also in writing to central government as well, and making the case for that. Having Helen and her team has been an absolute godsend in helping us work through all of those finances on a line-by-line basis so that we've got some confidence in what we've got. So, however, we still only get an annual settlements, effectively. So, similar to policing, we can only plan between now and next March. There's a CSR where we hope as a sector we will get better settlements. We're hoping to see more of a targeted settlement because we're one of 3 services named in the National HMI report as struggling financially, us, Buckinghamshire and Northumberland. And so we were hoping that the government might do something that was more targeted, as opposed to really delaying any talk of a bigger settlement until the CSR period, really, until sort of further reviews. And so, all I would say is just to reiterate everything that Helen said, it is very, very tight. I've got a list of things on my desk about things we can do, and it's like trying to choose what's your favourite child, effectively, because there's lots of things that you can't do. And so, when I'm telling people, yes, you can do that, I'm having to tell somebody else, by the way, you can't do that. And that is very, very difficult for people that are trying to do as good a job as they can. Having said all that, the mood in the organisation is positive. And, I think myself and the Chief Officer team, we're out at the moment doing visits around, all of the stations, all of the departments, and we're giving them a positive message, which is actually we can start to plan on that basis because, we are taking new people in. We're starting to talk about new vehicles and new equipment and how we can afford those. We've not been able to do that for a significant number of years. And so, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and this isn't a sort of a negative outlook. It's a very positive outlook, actually, from our perspective. But again, it's just reiterating to yourselves just how difficult and how tight that is. It really is a case of every penny counts, really, to be honest with you, and we're sort of almost on a weekly basis keeping an eye on the budget just to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do. Happy to take any questions.
Well, I think I noted at 7.4 you said that you'd written to the Minister to request urgent consideration for one-off for flexibility for the NCFRA. And I just wonder whether the panel might consider perhaps supporting that, and in view of particularly what Darren's just outlined, the fact that we are so special, if you like, in our situation. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say. And the other thing was that I note, and if I've read it correctly, at 10.2, 10.2, page 28, every percent in council tax gives you 0.155 per annum, and every percentage in pay equates to virtually the same amount, and we're talking about a 2% pay increase, which seems to me as though basically that 2% is just going to, effectively, just going to pay the pay increase. Not that I begrudge it at all, but it doesn't give you an awful lot of flexibility.
And I think that's why if I was, that's the rationale for behind the £5, because then 2% on that £5 in future years starts to mean you're building a more sustainable base, something that we've kind of talked about from a policing point of view as well. But you're absolutely right. Hard-working firefighters are going to get 2%. and that'll be any money that's raised from the council tax will go straight towards it. That doesn't take into account any other inflationary pressures to try and do. So you can also see why, given the policing financial envelope and the fire funding envelope, why actually purple services, if you like, are important. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to see, and my kind of original rationale for kind of helping to bring the two organisations under one governance model wasn't just about kind of saving the fire service from the county council. It was actually about making sure that each service is more likely to stay focused on Northamptonshire. You know, I don't think, had it stayed with us, Darren would have had no choice, but the control room would probably have been merged with Warwickshire and wherever that might or might not be. Or at least we actually have the opportunity to ensure it stays in the service of the kind of people of Northamptonshire. But we have written, I welcome your support. I'm happy to, we'll arrange from office to share the letter we've written, and you might want to put a basis or a letter on that basis. It would be most welcome.
I've got a number of people who want to speak. Richard, you were first.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the question for me is does this tight financial situation put people at risk? And that ultimately would be the question from the residents. Does the tight financial situation that you are facing as a Chief Fire Officer put residents at risk?
I don't think, no. I mean, we're not talking about cuts. I mean, you know, that's an important point to make, I think, is that we're talking about a balanced budget based on the 2%. We're not talking about reductions in anybody. In fact, we're talking about a slight increase in firefighters, actually, that will phase in through the year. What we would like to be able to do is actually increase capacity both in our prevention and our protection departments, because they're equally as important. We talked a little bit about prevention earlier in the policing terms. It's probably even more important in fire terms, because many of the fires that actually occur, many of the fire deaths that occur and injuries that occur have already actually occurred before anybody actually dials 999. So putting a greater amount of capacity into our prevention and our protection operations is another thing that we want to do. We've been able to do that, you know, in a small way in our protection team by a slight increase last year. So no, I don't think there's an increased risk to the public. But similarly, you know, as Simon was mentioned, as the risk starts to change in the county, and as we start to look at that different risk effectively with things like the increased road infrastructure, the increased, we only got to drive through any road, you'll start to see big warehouse buildings going up all over the place. As all of that starts to go up, we'll have to then start to reassess the type of response capability, prevention capability, protection capability that we need. So I think what we're talking about this year is almost a bit of a standstill type budget, really, in essence. Continue with that incremental improvement while we then completely review the risk in the county to look at what we need on an ongoing basis from there. I think that's important as well, because it links in nationally to what's going on. And again, you know, if you've not read the Sir Tom Windsor's State of Fire report, he's asking the government really to sort of make up your mind what you want the fire service to do. You know, those of you won't realise we're not funded to do water rescue or flood rescue, but we do it because there is nobody else to do it. We're not funded for that. So there's a lot of that stuff that, you know, that again, it's for government to decide what they want us to do. Then they need to fund accordingly. Then we can, once we know that's our responsibility, we can then start to equate, well, that's what the risk is in the county, and therefore this is what we need to do. And so there is a big national piece of work going on following the first round of inspections in fire, that some of that needs to be done at the national level before it sort of filters into local level. But like I say, because we are quite unique, what we really was hoping for is, you know, someone to put a bicycle pump on us and sort of pump us up a little bit, if you like, this year, to give us a little bit of breathing space while that national sort of stuff goes on. As it turns out, you know, I won't be able to loosen my belt a little bit this year. We'll have to keep it, you know, where it is. We'll have to keep it tight. We'll get ourselves through the year, and then we'll sort of reevaluate, I think, once the CSR comes in and once we see what sort of flexibility that we've got next year. But what I can promise you is that you've got, you know, a bunch of motivated and dedicated people in the service that, you know, are willing to, have rolled up their sleeves in the last year to be able to produce some increases in performance, and are willing to continue to do that. And I think what's important is, you know, for us, that the Commissioner has shown that he's supportive by writing to, you know, writing to the Minister, because that's what people want to hear, isn't it? I mean, people in services want to feel that they're being supported to deliver, and, you know, if that's the message that you're able to send, I think that would be equally as welcome in the service.
I think you next.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. A couple of points. I think, firstly, I'd like to thank the team who've put together the excellent breakdown financially. I think it's really important to see and understand exactly what the impacts there are of the current finances and those going forward, projection-wise. Second is we have already discussed the growth in the county to both blue light services effectively. And we've also acknowledged that quite clearly we have had some additional funding to police, not sufficient for us going forward, but we have had some additional funding which is helpful in terms of growing the numbers of officers there and the frontline presence which everyone really wants and needs. The issue in terms of fire and rescue is more rescue than fire, and prevention, protection, absolutely, as we've touched upon, is critically important. That cannot happen when we come from a protective element, working as partnerships and coming from a restrictive council service base, as it was. And that is one of the reasons that the separate governance arrangements were required and absolutely endorsed to ensure that there was going to be some independence and some opportunity for the service to raise the required amount, the sustainable amount of money going forward. 1.99% is not sustainable in my mind, and I don't think I support the proposal here, because going forward we need to have full recognition, and that includes obviously from next year onwards, apart from current day's factors, that we have a growth in the population, that we cannot spread our fire service any thinner than it is currently. We have been performing brilliantly. And I have to say, it's had a tough time. Sure, some areas, no one's complacent, need further improvements and need lots of investment. But we're talking about having critical investment to the wider community of Northamptonshire area. We also have the, one of the largest numbers, if not the largest number of senior population in the country. I think that has to also be borne in mind. We have different demographics. And we have a need as a separate county authority that's now come across from a government's perspective the second year running, to have a proper addressed financial envelope. It isn't currently. I think that the team do a brilliant job. Under new governance arrangements, it has a very strong structure, but it does not have sufficient funding going forward. And I suggest, Madam Chairman, that we don't just write to the Minister, we see the Minister responsible for this to discuss it further.
Thank you. Martin, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In his introduction, the Commissioner mentioned the historic financial problems at Northamptonshire County Council, but of course the problems were also that of culture. Much has been done to address the culture, but one thing is for certain is that the culture at Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue Service has never ever been doubted. Indeed, there are some exemplary aspects of the service that they provide. Helen mentioned business rates, because we have got huge businesses sprouting up all over the county, and as Darren also mentioned, with warehouses, and that's where we've had some examples of those warehouses catching fire, and that obviously takes up a huge amount of resource. So we've got huge growth in the area. What we need is to make sure that more Section 106 goes towards the fire service. I will be supporting the 1.99 this year, but I do think that we need to put more pressure on with some funding possibilities. And I'd like to think under unitary, in 2 or 3 years' time, we can be in a position whereby we can also help with the funding of our fire service.
Ken, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I'd like to commend the Chief Fire Officer with regards to his endeavours last year, and it actually is incredibly encouraging with regards to the resources that he's had to have at his disposal. I feel we have to support the 1.99% increase because, quite frankly, we don't really, in these circumstances, have really any other option until we get to the clarification whether, in fact, this £5 can actually be accepted. I think it's very important that, what he's outlined to us and the limitations that he's got and the way that his staff have actually responded is really exemplary. There's a couple of questions I'd like to ask from a fiscal perspective, is with regards to page 25, 5.2, why did the government decide that they would decrease from 3% to 2%? You know, was there any sort of reason? You know, it just seems arbitrary just to say 3% to 2%.
It does feel like fire really did get the short end of it.
Absolutely.
Because counties... Sorry, my gentle voice not heard. I do feel fire really did get the short end of the stick on this one, because obviously Shire and District Borough Councils have the opportunity to go to the 5 if available, if appropriate. Counties do get the extra for the social care, and rightly so, and policing could go to 10, but it does feel like fire were really hit hard by this. I don't know why the referendum limit was reduced.
And my last question, and I hope it's not going to be too inquisitive, but when you look at page 31, when you look at the capital financing charges, 12.5, page 31, 12.5 capital financing charges, 2021 they're 125k, and then it quadruples up to 540 the following year. Why is that?
Right at the beginning I mentioned that we were doing some further work on the capital programme, so the capital financing charges were based on our earlier version of the capital programme, and assuming that we had no other funding to help meet those costs. I'm delighted to say that we've signed and got the funding in for the Section 106 funding now from the County Council that can contribute to some of those capital costs, and similarly we've got the capital grants unapplied. I've also spoken with the Home Office, and once we've finalised our capital programme, we're able to have a discussion with them to perhaps reallocate some of those capital grants to slightly different projects. So when Darren and Paul and I have finished our capital review to put to Stephen, I expect the capital programme, the revenue costs of it to come down. Okay, there will still be a hit, but they will come down.
Thank you. I'd like to just ask you a question about, it's in the, I think it's Appendix Appendix 2, 4.3, where you mention Section 106. It's not specific about that point mentioned there. But I just wonder what the current situation was with Section 106, because from my experience, the County Council is still the one that's requesting the 106, and I don't know quite how that's working out, you know, whether they're referring back to yourselves or to the fire service to get that information.
So to help with the transition, we entered into an agreement with the County Council for a period of time where they would carry on providing the responses for the fire and rescue service. They link back into people within the service to get detail if they need it, but for things where they can just respond on a you know, a average, if there ever is such a thing, planning application, they do so. So effectively we're paying for a service from the County Council at the moment, which we'll review in the fullness of time.
I think that's worth saying. So that we carried on, we actually entered a contractual relationship with the county to provide a service actually for both police and fire around Section 106. Depending, sounds more menacing than I mean it to be. Depending on how successful they are, will determine whether we continue beyond the current contractual period. So if there is an incentive for them to be very successful, and we'll carry on with it if you like, or we may then roll that into our own in terms of purple, because there's obviously the Section 106, but also there's community infrastructure levy money as well. So we want to look at kind of all of those possibilities. Does that make sense? And also we're looking very carefully to make sure that that we can meet the conditions of some of the existing money that's actually in there, and make sure that we're with some of the capital requirements that the service has, that we can apply as many of them kind of against it. So trying to maximise the opportunity to minimise the burden on the public. That came out the right way.
Jane.
Thank you. Bearing in mind the very, very tight budget that you are describing, what is the risk over the pensions and the union discussions? You know, there could be huge compensation claims for discrimination there? And is there any funding coming forward from the government to cover this? Or
I'll start. We haven't made any local provision for it in our budget, but we are cited, we are aware, we know there are a lot of national conversations going on about this. The Chief Fire Officers are very tight and linked in on this with the pensions information and was in seeking the legal advice. So we're at a very early stage at a process. No funding has been identified as yet, as they're still working through what the implications are. But we are alive to it, we are excited on it, and we are making sure that our voices are included in it. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying so there's a bit more work to be done June, July time, and I think the LGA, Local Government Association, as representing the employers, are effectively saying to government is that fire authorities shouldn't have to pick up the bill for any of this, because the employers only implemented a pension scheme that was changed by the government effectively, so any future cost should fall on the government. Now, interestingly, the FBU have put in an injury to feelings claim, I think, for fear that employees might have to pick up back contributions, because obviously once they're put back into a different pension scheme, the previous pension scheme, the contributions would be higher, and obviously what they don't want is their members to be clobbered with the back contributions. And so, the LGA are working through some of that detail, because I think the view is that any tab shouldn't be picked up by individuals and shouldn't be picked up by fire authorities, but should be picked up by central government. But there is no information on that whatsoever as it currently stands. So I would say there is a risk there, but until we get any further information, it's almost impossible to quantify what that risk would be. I'd like to think the central government are going to end up picking up the cost, because passing on the cost to fire authorities would probably be unsustainable. It certainly would be unsustainable for us, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the bit, lobbying of kind of to government, and there's no indication the government's going to do the wrong thing, but we'll be holding them to account to make sure they do the right thing. Because Darren said there was a decision made, they choose to implement it, and services, if you like, only implemented what they said they were supposed to do. So I think they ought to pick up the tab. I just also wanted to kind of make the point, in this county, we don't have a dearth of high-rise, but we still have a few more than people think. And kind of on that basis, Darren made the point around very much about prevention and protection. So actually some of the stuff that might come around inspection. So there is also some risk about some additional obligations that kind of come down, also requirements that come out of both the Grenfell report and any kind of legislative aims that kind of changes that kind of come there. So I just highlight those to we are alive to them, we're watching it in kind of very carefully. We've got our own investment in those areas to try and do it, but there could be a significant new requirement that kind of go. So there genuinely remains some risks, if you like. And to be honest, any one of these can kind of unsettle. Now, I do sound like the man that keeps coming and asking you for money today. I was going to say, and I know you'll give me the eye to that effect. Trust me, I'm very conscious of that fact, all right? And you can imagine, just to give you some reassurance, one doesn't do that lightly in an election year. I never do it lightly, but that's even more concern that you kind of do. But I would ask you, obviously, to authorise and approve the 1.99. I would ask you, and I don't know how procedural this works, that should the latitude be given to also have a separate vote on whether you would support the £5. I'm just throwing that out for yourselves.
We're going to get some advice from James on that in a minute. Just
I would like to actually state the obvious to me. Looking at, first of all, at page 25, when you ask in a survey what the people thought about the £5 increase, 52% were prepared to pay it. More so, when you go then to page 27, it's been highlighted very explicitly that if you want to bring forward essential operational investment, then we need to pay £5 precept. That will bring 950k. And all of this operational investment are listed in page 29, paragraph 10.3, where it said clearly, premises budget, building, following. Establish a full register of ICT system, a rolling operation equipment maintenance, the replacement program, permanent post and baselines in the staffing, a procurement process, increase in appliance availability, support services. All of these will not occur, in my opinion, if it is just paying £1.21.
Some of these are managed to be built in the budget, Mrs Shields, so we have managed to build in the premises budget, the 200,000 in the top bullet point. We have managed to do that. We are picking up the asbestos survey and we have committed on the condition surveys on the buildings. What that comes to and what the results of that are, we would have to take a view depending on what the extent of those surveys tell us, but we would build that into hopefully the capital programme. The ICT systems we are including in the capital programme review. If the £5 was available, we would be able to do them a whole lot sooner. And that's what we would really like to do. We would really like to do some of these the whole lot sooner. And similarly on the operational equipment, we'd like to bring some of those sooner. So we have put some in the budget, but not as much as we would like to, I think it's fair to say.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I've read in great detail the whole report, and in my view, because the chief fire officer have read a terrible opening budget for starting with. There is no reserve of any kind. The capital program is non-existent. You have very obsolete equipment. So the residents here in Northampton don't really think about these things, except when there is a big fire like we've just had recently in Northampton. That's where you have your opinion, and that's where the people responded favorably on 52%, because you're talking about protecting the people, the residents in Northampton. And from my side, I'm certainly prepared to pay £5 per annum extra for a precept, which will give me the satisfaction to know that you are going to put in place all of this program that you listed into your report.
Okay, if we can just go to James, who's going to give us a bit of the technical side.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Yes, so as the Commissioner has highlighted, well, as things stand, a 1.99% increase is the maximum that can be proposed without going to referendum. That's correct. So, again, I think if the panel hypothetically were to take a position where it didn't support, it vetoed this precept because it didn't think it was high enough, that would put the Commissioner in the position of going for a referendum, which I don't think is an outcome that the panel would wish to come to pass, if I'm interpreting your position on this correctly. However, so what the legislation also provides is, in a case where there is no veto of the proposed precept, the panel makes a report, makes recommendations to the Commissioner. The Commissioner may then issue the precept he's proposed as the precept for the financial year, or issue a different precept, but only if the different precept would be in accordance with a recommendation made in the panel's report. So what that seems to point to, and again subject to members confirming that this is a correct interpretation of the direction you're going in, is a report from the panel that includes recommendations that it supports the an increase in the it supports the proposed increase in the precept, but at 1.99%. But if the situation developed so that greater flexibility was permitted to the Police and Fire and Crime Commissioner, the panel would also support an increase in the precept up to 8.23%, I think it is, which gives you your £5. So that is saying if the situation remains the same, where 1.99% is the maximum increase, the panel's conclusion is that it would support that. But if greater flexibility is allowed, there's a second recommendation which captures the point that the panel would support that greater flexibility being used to introduce an increase of up to 8.23%.
Well, I've heard a couple of members express the fact that they think the 1.99 is not sufficient, but obviously recognising that that is all the maximum that we can actually go to at the moment, as James has explained. Do we think we need to take that as one vote to say we'll accept the 1.99, or should we go straight to saying 1.99 but go to 5 afterwards?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We've heard from Darren that the residents of Northamptonshire will be safe. Of course, we'd like there to be a bigger than 1.99, but we are where we are. I think what people must also bear in mind is that some of our residents do not pay the full amount of their council tax bills, and we'd like them to. Some of them do not pay their council tax bills at all. So I think we have to bear that in mind. I think for this year that I would be, I wouldn't say happy, because happy is not the right word, but I think 1.99 this year would be the right figure, and then we can address it next year as far as the proposal is concerned, and by then, of course, we will be in shadow mode of the new unitary authorities.
Okay, so should we perhaps then take it as a resolution to whether we support 1.99 in the first place? Do you think?
So I think, Chairman, none of the panel seems to be opposing 1.99. So the conclusion would seem to be that the panel supports 1.99 in a situation where that is the maximum that can be that can be raised without requiring a local referendum.
Is everyone happy with that? Supporting 1.99, assuming that's the maximum?
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think taking James' earlier point in terms of the flexibility and encouraging that, and obviously requesting a meeting with the Minister, I think it's important so that there is some discussion here that goes wider than just an agreement, if you like, or an endorsement, I think, which is really important. Yeah. We clearly support the PFCC and Chief Fire Officer and the entirety of our county structure to have that ability to try and reclaim more. I think the 1.99 has been pegged, as we know, to local government. The collar should have been removed or reviewed at the very least, and it hasn't been when the government's arrangements were transferred. So that really is important that we have the flexibility. I think that James has summed up accurately the opportunities. The ceiling is 1.99, but we should absolutely want to have the increase to £5 if at all possible.
Yeah, Chair, I thought we were going to agree the 199 and then have a second resolution for the 5.
That was my intention.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, as long as we're going on to the £5, that's great. Yeah.
Well, so as I said, 1.99, everyone is agreed that should that be the maximum, they will be agreed. Now we go on to the question of if there was some flexibility, would members be happy to, in view of the fact, obviously, we don't want to put the cost up to our residents, but we, at the same time, want to protect people by having sufficient resilience at the fire service. So,
sorry, Chair, I think the money was about the prevention. It was about, and this is about saving lives. Yeah, and so therefore, I would like to propose that if they do have flexibility, that we increase it to the 8.2.
Let's say the £5. I think.
£5 is a.
8.23%.
Yeah, and I'd like to.
I would say.
Yeah, me too.
So we have a proposer and a seconder that if there was a flexibility, so otherwise, if we didn't vote on this now, if there was the Commissioner would have to more or less come back to us to ask for any change. And I'm not sure there's even a mechanism for doing that, that we would be agreeable to go into £5.
For investment into protection?
Yes, and particularly to invest in protection, yeah.
Do we want to be set?
Well,
I understand that's the intention, but do we want to be constraining the Commissioner in that way?
Sorry, Madam Chair, we have to substantiate the reasons to why we're making that decision, otherwise it looks as if we're just plucking a figure out the air. So I think if we are completely honest about the fact that what we want in transparent, not honest is transparency, is the prevention and protection element that has really been indicated very strongly by Chief Fire Officer and others, that investment is absolutely required, would be the right thing to do. Totally.
Can I, small point of order?
Yes.
And I don't want to be, you're being very helpful and constructive. I don't want to be difficult. I think if James checks the legislation, you can't specify where I spend the money. It has to be, and I don't mean that. That you can recommend, I think, is the thing, and I'm all for you kind of recommending, but actually, you know, with the utmost respect, if when Helen Darren sitting down as they're working through the capital programme, that they determine that some small investment here that they can't do and they've got a pot of money, that could kind of be worse. So I also want to highlight, and I'm very grateful for you doing that, but the timescales are not with us. Helen needs to write to the districts, the collecting authorities, in something like 10 days' time.
Within the next couple of weeks, we won't hold you up.
Yes.
Martin, you wanted to come in.
I just think we've got to be very careful about the increases that are going to hit people's bills. We know we've already agreed to increase the police precept. Northamptonshire County Council will go for the maximum that they are permitted. The borough councils are likely to, and the district councils are likely to increase theirs. New town councils are being created across the county, and that will bring a precept, albeit fairly low, I would hope, in the first year. So I would caution another increase this year. I think we should seek out additional funding opportunities, as has been mentioned earlier, but I would caution putting another increase on the bills that hit people's doormats in May.
Stephen, you wanted to come back?
I get on well with my learned colleague and a friend. Yeah, I'm coming for the butter up. Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue has suffered for a number of years as part of being of the county council. Some are, as of others, it's almost even more grossly unfair to kind of go because of other people who've got money. The weight needs to be based on the fire and rescue service and the risk that actually thing. I really would like you to vote, and thank you for the vote on the 1.99. I'm not sure we'll get the opportunity to exercise the £5, but it would strengthen my hand quite significantly in the discussions I'm having with government going forward to make sure, even if we don't get that this year, that we get it in future years. You know, and so having, in terms of supportive panel, I don't know what else I could say to you, Martin, to beg, borrow and steal for you to vote for the £5 when it comes as a before you to a vote in a minute. But gross, you know, we talked about in terms of some of the risk. We're still finding things that we don't know. I mean, like we'll be talking some of the ICT budgets, because also how money was handed down to the fire and rescue service. You know, we found little things in the ICT budget where, because they had a pot of money, they paid them for 5 years, and so we've suddenly found, oh, that was paid for 5 years and it's now the 6th year, or actually we know we've got some money for that and it's not in the base budget for next. So poor Helen has has definitely had some grey hairs on that basis. So I really would hope that you would go for the £5. I fully accept, and the point's been made and is not lost on me, I should go for election this year, and increasing my risk to myself. But I genuinely think it's the right do for the Fire and Rescue Service, because then on that basis any 1.99 in the future is in the base budget, and it kind of reduced that risk.
Hearing what also has been said with regards to, and when you think of our council taxpayers, when you work out the difference between what we've just agreed, which is the 1.99, it actually is going to make an addition £3.79 per annum with regards to some additional funding for the fire service. And quite frankly, for £3.79, that's neither here nor there, if I can put it that way. So if I may suggest that we actually go ahead with the proposal, that we make a second proposal, that we actually have, if we have the opportunity, we actually can give authorisation for the £5 as opposed to, you know, the £1.21 as actually outlined.
I think it's important to note, Chair, that this would be a recommendation from the panel. It'd still be the Commissioner's decision. So the panel would essentially be saying that it recommends, if the flexibility is available, that the Commissioner takes the decision to use that to increase the precept up to 8.23%, £5. And I think the point is correct that the panel's statutory role relates to the level of the precept. I think you would get there would be the points about the importance of prevention activity and the context that Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue Service is coming from could certainly be brought out in the panel report. I think you would start to get into a risky situation the more the panel was talking about going beyond talking about the level of the precept into how money within the budget should and shouldn't be used. So I think the point can be made about the level of the precept. The comments about the importance of prevention can be brought out in the body of the report.
Jane, you want to?
Thank you. I think it's just really, really unfortunate the timing of this is going to coincide with unitary, with, I mean, certainly Northampton will be going to a precept, a town council and a precept there, precepts in parishes where we haven't had them before. I think, you know, I absolutely agree that the money should be there for the development of the fire service, but I think it's going to have to be handled with extreme sensitivity, because when people hear sort of, you know, 8.23%, there's going to be alarm bells ringing. I don't think that the county council at the moment is particularly well regarded in terms of its financial, you know, management, maybe, with, you know, lots and lots of extra expenditure going on over unitary. I think it's, you know, one of those things that has to be represented in the right way to people. You know, certainly I'm going to struggle if somebody comes to me and says, you know, that's a very high percentage. Put it into real terms, and what it's going to achieve is the important message. But you know, people aren't very confident, I think, with all the you know, the commissioners on very, very high salaries that we have at the moment, that you know, people shouldn't be bearing extra costs. Just to sort of, it's a PR exercise, I think, more than.
I think we just have to bear in mind that we've just agreed £10 for the police. Right. So, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Ian, could you make way a second? Because I think you were going to be supportive, but I just want to remind that 81% of residents supported an increase, you know, and over 52% supported more than £5 tax. So there is overwhelming support, and we are talking about, for all of the other ones there, you're talking about, I think the exact number is £3.79. And, you know, and any increase is not welcome, but you're talking to about, and you will know that will come through Grenfell, and so there will be further recommendations that will come down the line. You're increasing, you're not just making it more likely that they can respond effectively. And the last thing any of us wants is that we didn't vote it and a fire engine breaks down on the way to, or as happened recently, admittedly, luckily it was only a training vehicle, but actually one of the actual hoses absolutely shattered and anyone that stood near it would have been injured. I genuinely say to you that actually it's welcome. I don't think we'll actually get the opportunity to implement it just because the timing is going to be quite unfortunate. Just to your point, the unitary bills come next year, they don't come this year. So I just, that bit, and again, to penalise the fire service that's been part of the county council, that's when it got unring-fenced, that its money got taken and spent on something else, you're almost, what I'm almost hearing is, and I have to push back at you for it, is almost, well, we're going to penalise them again. I mean, come on, folks.
James wanted to come in.
Yes, through you, Chair. I mean, I think, I don't know whether it would help, but it may do so to look at the way that this potential conclusion may be expressed more in scrutiny terms, which is about less emotive, more objective. Not that I'm saying that members who've spoken are being too emotive, so much as what it seems to boil down to is panel members are recognising an increase in the precept above 1.99% would have an impact on local taxpayers. Of course it was, but are you saying that on balance that impact would be outweighed by the risks to the service provided that could be provided to the public in Northamptonshire and the risks to the strength and sustainability of Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue Service if the opportunity wasn't taken to increase, should it arise, to increase the precept?
Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add the fact that a couple of years ago my wife had a medical episode. We rang 999. The ambulance couldn't get there for 45 minutes. 5 minutes later our local fire brigade turned up and they supported her until she was taken to hospital. Now, that's not fire and rescue. That is supporting all the residents of this area. And I think, as Stephen said, it's highly unlikely that this is going to go through because there isn't a time element. But it does give him the confidence, this panel's behind him, to say that the fire service is underfunded and we need more money. And that will support him when he goes to minister or to government and whatever to try and get more money. So I'm fully supportive of it. If it was down to me, I'd give you £20, but, and I understand where, people got concerns about council tax and paying this, that and the other. But this is a vital service for every single resident of this county. And I think they should be fully supported and more than they are today. So I'm fully supportive of it. Thank you.
So I think actually we had, I think Richard and Ken proposed and seconded that the panel was supportive if there was a flexibility to go to £5. And as James said, all the other text can be put in the report as to why and the wherefores. So can I have a vote on that, please? All supporting that proposal to go up to £5? Any against?
I know, I don't.
No abstentions either, so that was 100% backing for that position.
I think I just want to say on behalf of the Fire and Rescue Service, thank you, because that also means a lot to all those firefighters and Darren and his team for the work that they're kind of doing. If it doesn't come through, actually their support, your support means an awful lot, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, the last item... Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Going on too fast. We agreed the proposal, the precept, but does the panel agree to delegate authority to myself and to the Deputy Chair to approve the final report on the proposed precept to be submitted to the Commissioner by the 8th of February? Okay, thank you very much. Now on to the last item, which is just a matter of the future work programme. find it. We're going to be hopefully only a few minutes with this. Yeah. I think, yes, I mean, James has outlined it. He's got the potential sort of topics at the end. Is there anything else that's come up from today that anyone thinks we need to add? James?
Well, Chair, there was an offer from the Commissioner to bring to the next panel meeting a report on his new or updated estate strategy. And earlier in the discussion, the panel raised the possibility of seeking an update on the development of the Commissioner's medium-term financial plan in the context of the comprehensive spending review. There was also a suggestion that the panel seeks a briefing or a visit to the new rehabilitation prison in Wellingborough, if I have that correctly. So all of those can be added. It would Okay. So yeah, as the Deputy Monitoring Officer has reminded me, there was more than a suggestion in the previous discussion that the panel should be writing to the relevant minister about the case for further funding for Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue Service, and indeed it was suggested that a meeting might be sought with the minister. What your likelihood of success on that is, I wouldn't like to say, but they can be requested. So yeah, that's for further actions that are arising from the current discussion. All of those potential areas can be added to the list of potential business. Clearly, we have another meeting coming up in a month's time. It would be useful for the panel to give an indication of what from that list it prioritised.
I think perhaps it might be a little early for the comprehensive spending review in March.
Yes.
So if that was later, I think the estates would be good to have in March, as you seem to suggest that might be available then. I think writing to the Minister can be done in between, and perhaps just a verbal update on how that's gone.
One just question, I haven't checked the diary, but Ian has. The 12th of March is a Thursday, yes. And Thursdays are now unitary days all day, as at least two of my colleagues, probably three around here, know. So I don't know whether there's anything that can be done on that. And they're going to be like that right up until...
Can we perhaps change the date, James?
Provided you don't drift into PERDA for the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner elections, which would be a serious complication.
I can just sit here quietly then and go, no comment.
But PERDA starts on the... It's either 30th or 31st of March, so we've got a little while around. So sometime in March, but before PERDA, if we can perhaps find a different date that would help.
Preferably not Thursday.
Not a Thursday, yeah.
First of all, so where in this would we be seeing the updated MTFP?
Could I suggest that maybe September might be a good time? Work on the CSR, I believe, is happening between now and the summer. I'd hope that we had some info. If we don't, I can update you on the MTFPs at that point anyway.
Sure.
The September Finance Monitoring Reports.
And I understand that the new Commissioner, presumably you again, or if somebody different, you have to reissue the strategy within a year, is that right?
Yes. So whoever is the Commissioner, regardless of whether it's the incumbent or a newcomer, has to produce a new police and crime plan and a new fire and rescue plan by the 31st of March after the May when they take office, if that makes sense. So they've got till 31st of March next year to do so.
Okay, so that
needs to be in your work programme somewhere, but where will obviously depend on who's sitting in that chair.
Yeah, okay. So that'll... Yeah, it's just thinking, well, February's really busy with the precept, so that actually, if you're trying to do it before the end of this calendar year, it's actually quite a bit of work to factor in, isn't it?
Well, we're finished on February now. Just remind members that we won't need to have the 18th of February. That will not
I would
be
hope to return and do all I can to mitigate that for you.
I think, I mean, we've only got up
in
to March.
fairness, there is a serious point here.
Yeah.
I would expect to deliver my, if I'm fortunate enough that it's myself, I would expect to deliver that before the end of the year, because if anything, mine would be a continual evolution of what I'm not looking for. Reassured both chiefs, there's not some dramatic realignment. There'll be probably some new commitments that I will have made, obviously fully costed in my case.
I think probably because this only goes to March, we would be seeing an extended one with, going into the next year at the next meeting. So things that are going to happen next year, we can put on there then.
I'm just looking at my diary. I'm not trying to force them into days. Not that I like this as a gorgeous day, but because you kind of have the following 2 weeks after that and pair the starts. I think it's the 26th, isn't it? Not that I feel like it's a great day for a panel, but why not? Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th of March.
March, yeah, so that's the following day. NCC site visit for PC, but that doesn't often go ahead, does it?
So through you, Chair, is the panel saying it wants that to be on Friday the 13th of March, unless it turns out there's an overriding reason? Why not? Yeah.
I think we usually say 1 o'clock for normal meetings, don't we? Yeah, this one was an unusual one. So, those other items that were suggested, states, what was the other one, James? Ministerial update.
Contact the Minister, briefing or visit to the new rehab prison in Wellingborough. Councillor Griffiths will be able to say what the timing.
That won't be at a meeting, so we can just arrange that in between. Yeah. Okay, is everyone happy with that then? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for your indulgence. Somebody asked me at the beginning, would we be finished by 5? And I assured them that we would.
Very good.